There today?
We opened in the evening for
Great.
when I looked at that.
They usually do. So there's one question. Everybody answers, or is it just? Is it part of Innova?
Separate.
Separate from Innova?
Yeah. It feeds into Innova, but it's different.
How did she get in touch with you? Did your dad? Or?
She was there.
Hey, Becky, I see you've logged in. Can we do an audio check?
Ripping into it already.
Hold on a second, Becky. Sophie's going to check something. We didn't hear you.
Ooh, my box is sitting pretty small.
Yep, not Kestron. Okay. All right, Becky, can you try again for us for an audio check?
Oh, no.
Yep, I'm here.
Excellent.
Can you hear me?
We sure can. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
So much to do. It's hard to keep track of these things. Like even when you sit
All right, it's 7:30, or actually 7:31 or 2. Why don't we go ahead and get started? So welcome to the Monday, October 16th, 2023 work session of the Falls Church City Council. We're delighted you all are with us this evening. Let's go ahead, I'm going to call the meeting to order and ask that Ms. Messner call roll call, please, for us.
Sure, Mayor. Ms. Conley? Here. Mr. Duncan?
Here.
Ms. Hardy?
Here.
Ms. Leon?
Here.
Ms. Hiscott?
Here.
Mr. Snyder is absent. Mayor Tarter?
Here.
Thank you, Mayor.
All right, thank you. So we've got a very busy agenda tonight. We also have a closed session, so I would just say to all involved, let's keep this train moving. It's probably going to be a long night as it is. Before we get started, however, last week, the Falls Church City Council conference, a local government conference in Norfolk, VML, Virginia Municipal League, which we go to every year. So this is our first meeting since the events in Israel, and I'd like to make a statement with my colleagues about that. The Falls Church City Council unequivocally condemns the terrorist attacks on Israeli civilians by Hamas. We are outraged by the attacks on innocent men, women, and children, including the abduction of the elderly, families, and infants at gunpoint as hostages and human shields. This appalling violence has no place in the resolution of disputes. There can be no justification for these acts of terrorism. City Council mourns the tragic loss of life and the devastating harm to so many innocent lives in this region. Many members of the Falls Church community have direct ties of family and friendship to the area. Our hearts go out to those who have suffered loss, those being held hostage, and loved ones living in terror. We urge members of our community who comprise such a rich diversity of religious faiths, tolerance, and compassion to seek connection and understanding during these dark times of conflict. We hope for peace in Israel, Gaza, and throughout the Middle East. Thank you. All right, let's get on with our agenda. If we can, first item is commercial and retail report. Mr. Snyder, Mr. Shields, who's going to be handling this? I think you are probably.
Like to invite Lisa Benjamin to the table, and there's a microphone for you there. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. And we do have our Division Chief for Economic Development, Becky Witzman, and our Director of Community Planning and Economic Development, Jim Snyder, participating virtually. Becky or Jim, do you have any introductory or welcoming remarks you would like to make before we turn it over to Ms. Benjamin?
Thank you, Wyatt. I guess I would just add that Lisa has a long history with the city. She was one of the first people I met when I started working for the city. She brought Penzi and Cozy to the Byron. She did some work for us with regard to the Kensington project. She has 34 years of real estate experience that she brings to us, a depth of knowledge about many topics, educated at the Wharton School. She has a whole lot of awards and experience to her credit, a very long bio that I'm happy to share with folks if they'd like to see it. But we have been very happy to have Lisa working with us, and we appreciate all of her help.
And Wyatt, this is Jim Snyder. Lisa, I think, brings an enthusiasm and genuine interest in the city, and that you'll feel that tonight as she makes her report.
All right. Well, thank you for that great introduction. You got a wonderful pedigree. We're delighted to have you with us this evening. Look forward to what you have to say. So,
thanks. So, Jim and Becky had asked me to spend some time looking at the retail environment in Falls Church, both kind of existing retail and what we can do to kind of help that healthy retail stay in place, and to the extent that there are vacancies, what, kind of what's on the horizon for retail that's in demand and that may potentially fill those spaces. And then to kind of overlay that with just general retail trends as we're coming out of COVID, and trying to understand kind of how the landscape has changed, and really how that applies to Falls Church in particular. So if you'll go to the next slide, and one more beyond it. So kind of like anything, there are both opportunities and challenges that have impacted the retail environment after COVID. I think way more opportunities than challenges, and certainly I think Falls Church is the beneficiary of that. I guess what we can start with is the fact, and you can go one more out, is that, the whole remote work and work from home effect is that retailers are finding that they really want to be located in suburban locations close to their end user. And that's, and for the purposes of this analysis, Falls Church really is considered kind of a suburb, a very close in one with great metro access, but still it's not the urban core. And I think kind of from a retail perspective, we're seeing a lot of demand from retailers to be close to their end user, and as a result, really wanting to have kind of a physical presence in the suburbs. Everybody was very concerned, particularly during COVID, that online shopping was just going to replace brick and mortar retail, and that has really not been the case. While Amazon has been a huge beneficiary of that over the last, many years, I think more and more retailers are finding that they do best when they have a physical presence that is combined with a robust online environment. And so lots of retailers, for a variety of reasons, are kind of combining online shopping with having a physical presence, and that also has driven up the demand for retail. And then lastly, I think that, given kind of the inflationary environment, while people may be not quick to indulge in really big ticket items, there is discretionary spending for smaller ticket items, and everybody's kind of after the experience. And so experiential retail, that is everything from, an Apple Genius bar to, going into an eyeglass store and being able to have all of the optics to understand kind of exactly what looks best on you, has very much come into vogue. And I think that retailers are benefiting from that and opening up stores that have that really as kind of part of what they're dealing with. We can go one more. On the negative side, and the challenges that I think everybody is feeling, is really just the impact of inflation overall, and that both makes those buying decisions and eating out decisions more difficult for consumers. And I think that retailers are responding by really kind of relooking at what price points they need to be at and what those offerings are. And then I think, as everybody would agree, the in-person shopping experience may not be as much fun as it used to be. It's, stores for the most part are still short-staffed. You walk into many drugstores. I mean, this has been all over the news. I work downtown, and you walk into the CVS and everything is locked up, and it's both a little bit disheartening to see, but it's also things just take longer because you've got to reduce sales staff to start with, and then they need to wait to find somebody to unlock the cabinet to buy soap or deodorant. I mean, it's not even just high-end things. So I think that there is some frustration on the part of just shoppers that being in stores used to kind of universally be a positive thing, and I think that's really more of a mixed bag now. And I think that both retail landlords and retailers themselves are trying to figure out how to best deal with that. For Falls Church in particular, I mean, you're in the enviable position of having a really robust and diverse retail base. A low vacancy rate of 3.5%, and we had Becky and Jim had asked me to look at kind of the retail and office vacancy in Falls Church, comparing it to Tysons or to Arlington or to kind of your neighboring markets that certainly are larger but may provide some useful comparison. And I think, not a surprise to you all that live here, you've got kind of an equal amount really of retail space and commercial office space. And I think that has been a benefit in that the vacancy rate on the office is lower in Falls Church than certainly anywhere else in Northern Virginia. But that is probably more related to the fact that your inventory of commercial office space tends to be smaller, tends to be older, and so I think it's a bit of a mixed bag. I mean, we looked at it compared to Tysons. So Tysons has 6 times the amount of office space as retail space, but it's really a very low retail vacancy. I mean, still only a 3% vacancy rate for retail, and with 5.8 million square feet, and that's really grown even over the last couple of years. So, I think that the statistics would indicate that just from a health perspective, you have a low vacancy rate, which is in keeping with really kind of the rest of the market. So that's a positive. I think the only negative is that on the office side, which I know is not what I've been asked to look at, your average rents are substantially lower than most other places, certainly than Tysons or Arlington or kind of most of the markets that are close to you. And I think that's reflective really of the age and quality of your office space more than anything else. It just comes into play when you've got ground floor retail and, in an office building, it's harder to figure out just what's gonna replace that tenant that was there, because there's just not, I don't know that there are loads of possibilities for that. When we look at kind of the retail landscape in Falls Church, it generally falls into kind of 3 chunks. So you've got, good-sized strip shopping centers with typically surface parking lots, and some grocery anchored, some not, with a variety of retailers. What we kind of call Main Street retail, which is, buildings that may be 1 or 2 stories that largely here front on Broad Street that have, retail on the first floor, either all owned by the same landlord or owned by disparate landlords, but kind of they feel like a finished block. And then the third is just freestanding buildings. Some of the things that you see as you are close to the Fairfax line, as well as like BJ's, which is just, kind of a building on its own that isn't really drawing from anything else around it. And so part of the question is, if you want to change up the retail landscape, given that this is where, this is how the retail breaks out, how do we do that? Number one, does it really need to be done? But, if we decide that we'd like to make some changes, how do we do that, and where can you potentially have the most impact? And I think, there are a couple of things. I mean, from a programming perspective, this blurring of kind of community use and retail is only on the rise. I mean, I don't know that that's a new concept, but I think people tend to gather in retail spaces. And we see in a lot of markets, landlords potentially with incentives from the jurisdiction that the real estate happens to be located in, but they're offering all kinds of activities in those surface parking lots. And that's everything from art shows to dog shows to classic car shows to farmers markets, and whatever it happens to be. It's a way of kind of drawing people to the center, ideally driving up retail sales, because people are there anyway for some other reason, and really kind of creating a sense of community. And that's something that is not that hard to do, and it's not that expensive to do, and would be something that if there's an interest of kind of merging the public good and creating a more robust retail stand, that's kind of an easy place to have some effect. To the extent that there are vacancies, or we're looking at where are there opportunities in terms of new retail coming in, I've been asked this question by Becky and Jim a couple of times, which is, do we have too many grocery stores and do we have too many restaurants? And I think my answer for both of those is know, and you're in the enviable position of having lots of grocery stores and lots of restaurants, but the data really points to the fact that grocery stores are really kind of the one sector of retail that is just poised for the greatest growth going forward. And I think that's, it's for a couple of reasons. I mean, one is that grocers have had the least impact in terms of benefiting from online sales. I mean, people will buy their giant things of dog food or, things that are just not easy to navigate from a grocery store. But for the most part, people still go to the grocery store, and what they're ordering online are dry goods, aren't perishables, obviously, but that, the demand for grocery is likely to continue. And given the fact that people's work schedules have changed and they may be home more during the day, during the week, they think less of going to several different grocery stores to get the things that they need, and it may be different things from different stores. And grocery stores, as a result, are really kind of curating their offerings for the markets that they're serving. So it sounds a little bit counterintuitive given the range of grocery stores that you currently have in Falls Church, but I would be one to say that there still is more demand out there for grocery stores. So I think that's a healthy thing, and honestly kind of a good thing to be thinking about. And in terms of restaurants, it's I don't think that there's a legitimate concern that adding new restaurants are necessarily going to cannibalize the sales of existing restaurants. I mean, I think that, one big shift that we've seen as a result of COVID is this movement away from larger footprint, heavily staffed restaurants to restaurants that do big to-go businesses and that don't need the staffing and can fit into smaller spaces. And so that may be really kind of a solution for some of your smaller vacancies that, for restaurants that are largely geared for to-go service. And we're seeing that in other places. I mean, Panera, there's again one close to my office downtown that is 100% to go. I mean, you order online, there's no seating, there's no anything, and you can either drive up and get it or walk in and get it. It's typically kind of 1,000 square foot footprint, and concepts like that I think are likely honestly going to increase with other restaurants, just because folks have gotten used to using a restaurant really as an alternative to going to the grocery store, and so it doesn't need to be an in-restaurant eating experience. It's just a way of kind of getting food. So I would see that as being a possibility as well. I think we can go on to the last page, which is the last thing that I was asked to give some thought to is, as new projects are being built, and Falls Church, has this, I love the term voluntary concessions and working for developers because it doesn't feel all that voluntary, but the notion that, there is kind of a trade-off for extra density and extra height and maybe relaxed design standards and what is important for that developer to give back in exchange for having that flexibility, and how that plays into what are the uses that the city would like to see on the ground floor. And I went back and looked at the voluntary concession packages for a couple of projects that have delivered over maybe the last 7 or 8 years, as well as Insights project. And I would say that there potentially, it would be worth looking at whether some of the things that have historically not been, have either been conditional or disallowed uses are things that maybe you want to revisit as being possibilities. And, the couple that come to mind are preschools, which is, is kind of an easy one. They tend to use a fair amount of space. It's obviously almost exclusively a first floor use for all the obvious reasons. And if, you can get around figuring out how to provide the green space and how to provide the fresh air and how to do the drop off and pick up and lots of logistical things that are required to make it work. But for the most part, they're really good users of ground floor space. You're providing a community benefit because the demand for daycare just continues to grow. So I would volunteer that as something to maybe consider more. And along that line are the indoor kids gyms and, kind of a variety of things that are geared towards families that may have younger children and obviously want to have those needs met, directly in the community. The other thing, is this mixing of kind of retail and medical. It's MedTail is kind of the term for it, but it's everything from wellness centers to certainly urgent care, which I know you have some locations in Falls Church, but it doesn't necessarily need to be a building with 50 individual doctor's offices that brings with it a slew of parking and other requirements, but the notion that kind of medical that feels more like retail and less like medical, that could be a ground floor use, is something that just from where retail is going tends to be a user in first floor spaces in mixed use projects kind of all around the region. So potentially something that you would want to think about here. We've talked about, I've mentioned this to Jim and Becky as well. Automobile showrooms are a very popular ground floor retail use to have. The, brand new high-end multifamily in Bethesda has, an Orsman showroom in its lower level. This was popular with Tesla downtown, and so it's not a new concept, and one that you don't necessarily need to have kind of the whole inventory of cars right there for folks just to come, be able to test drive. But it is part of that immersive, shopping experience that people, just get to see what's new and what's cool, and they tend to be big users of space and may be something to consider. I've listed some other ones, but those are the ones that I think, have historically not been allowed or, certainly not encouraged. And maybe just given where retail trends are going, it's something that I would suggest thinking about.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Sure.
If you don't mind, maybe we can ask you a few questions.
Of course, yeah.
So let's go ahead and open it up to questions and comments from folks, keeping in mind we have a busy agenda. But let's go see who's got some questions or some comments for our guests tonight. Ms. Hardy?
Great. Thank you for joining us, Lisa. I had the luxury of seeing your preview of this at the EDA a couple months ago, so thank you for this. A couple of questions. So one, I thought getting benchmarking for our retail and office vacancy was really helpful. So the fact that we're pretty on par with our retail vacancies with Tysons and Arlington is important, because we often hear criticism that we have a lot of vacancies.
Right,
And the data points otherwise. And then on the office front, it's a third of the vacancy rate of Tysons and maybe even a fourth of what Arlington sees.
Right.
I think is quite remarkable. But as you said, it's kind of double-edged sword, because it's frankly because we have little office space compared to those other markets, and we have a lot of Class B and C. But I think that was really important soundbite that hopefully gets out there, because there is a lot of misconception about what our vacancy rates are. So that was great. One of the actionable things that you had put inside kind of what we can do about retail was around strip malls, and how I liked the talk about how to blend kind of community use with the retail use. And I think we see great examples of that, like the Eden Center hosts movie nights in their parking lots. Founders Road does yoga and fitness in their green space. And so we're seeing lots of good examples like that from our property owners. But from the city's perspective, like, what can we do? You had a couple recommendations around how do we help with our signage ordinance, for example, to make retail more successful.
Right.
Do you have other suggestions like that we can do beyond asking our property owners to?
And subsidizing your property owners if they're looking for financial help to do it.
Okay.
And marketing it and advertising it. To the extent that the city has, different avenues that you're reaching people that an individual landlord may not. I guess that would be the third thing.
Okay. And then I want to put a pin in that signage, because I know that when we get to the zoning cleanup, that is one of the things that I think was outlined as a future thing that we need to clean up, is our sign ordinance, and whether that needs to be updated to be more modern for the kinds of uses we have today. So I think I noted that the connection between those two agenda items. My second topic has to do with the population needed. I think I might have asked this in the EDA as well. So the example I often cite is that back in 2015, we had no independent coffee shops in Falls Church. Since then, we've added 6 that are all locally owned, great small businesses. And clearly, we've added population since then. Do you have a sense of kind of like how many more we can support? Is there a certain population kind of critical mass we need to kind of support the walkable retail? And the difference is, I think we often talk about ourselves as kind of being destination retail before. But I think as we think about being more walkable and more environmental friendly, we would love to be more neighborhood retail and walkable retail, especially with the shift to kind of more working from home.
Right.
So is there a commensurate kind of population that you need to support that kind of density in retail?
I don't think so. And it would be that, part of it just depends on the new retail coming in, the size and the scope of what's being added. But no, I mean, I think that typically with walkable retail and particularly kind of local retail, more is better. I mean, you know, the people may choose between the two or three and obviously not go back to the same one time and time again. But I don't think you run the risk of having too many coffee shops and not enough people to support it. I don't see that as being a concern.
I guess let me rephrase differently. Is there a population we need to support that kind of neighborhood walkable retail? Or are we kind of...
Oh, boy, I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah.
Other comments, Mr. Duncan?
A couple of things. One is what you said about large concept stores having smaller versions as a possible area of growth for us. Of course, we tried that with Target, and it succeeded for 5 years, which is, you know, some amount of time. But in the long run, they had to go in a different direction. Are there other companies that jump to your mind that we should be recruiting, appealing to try to bring their smaller version of whatever it was that they used to have that was big?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly a lot of the, Macy's has a small format. I mean, a lot of the larger department stores have come in with smaller footprints. I mean, I think it still is largely going to depend on, you know, the particular retail, either vacancy that you're trying to fill or space where it's located, and are you trying to fit on 2 floors just to make it fit into a smaller format, or what exactly is it going to be? But I'm happy to kind of provide you with a list, but I think and smaller may also mean like an IKEA that typically was 200,000 square feet and now will fit into a 75,000 square foot store. So smaller may not be, you know, what we're thinking about here, but I think we're seeing it across the board.
Well, I think that'd be helpful if you could give us a clue. I mean, I know Becky and Jim have been working that angle, but I think it's helpful for the public to know that, you know, we're aware that there are some vacancies. It's a low vacancy rate, but nonetheless, every vacancy in Littleville here is important. And we are working to try to bring new businesses in.
Right.
Second area of focus, at VML last week, I was struck by, no matter which session I went to, whether it was about economic development or the environment or whatever, it always came back to housing. People living closer to where it is that they do the things they do, whether that's work or shop or daycare or whatever. So much hinges on the ability of businesses to recruit employees who do not have to drive, 50 miles back and forth to their jobs. Is anybody anywhere shown, innovation and creativity and techniques that we can use here to try to bring in, affordable living options for small businesses particularly, or for folks who are working the floor at restaurants and other medical establishments, as you said. Urgent care is a big thing. What have we to learn in that area?
And are you asking about where there's retail opportunity or housing opportunity?
Would we, just for one example, would we be better off to focus on sort of our traditional approach here, which has been ground floor retail with housing above, or should we acknowledge that there's such need for housing that maybe an all-housing building would, in the long run, provide more economic boost because it gives places for people to live who are working in other businesses in other buildings?
Yeah, I mean, that's a tough one. I think that the jurisdictions that I work in have kind of tackled that by providing incentives to developers for increasing whether it's affordable or workforce, and that's just kind of the what bands of income you're dealing within that. In Montgomery County, for example, so it's somewhere between 12 and 15% affordable for a new project over 100 units, but a developer can voluntarily choose to go 25% affordable, and affordable in that instance is workforce, and then it's an extra 4 floors and probably 25 or 30% more vacancy, more occupancy allowed, more density allowed. And to your point, I mean, that is largely done both because I think the county is concerned about not having enough housing for people that are working in the jurisdiction and want to be able to both encourage developers to build it and be able to have residents live there. So, I think it really depends on what you're trying to solve for. Just to change the ground floor to residential as opposed to commercial, I don't know that you get a huge bang for your buck. I mean, I think it would likely need to be more intensive than that.
Okay, all right. All right, thank you.
Other comments? And we should wrap this up fairly soon. I know it's a big topic, but we do have a lot more to go. Ms. Conley?
Thanks for your presentation, Ms. Benjamin. Ms. Hardy mentioned that it's nice to benchmark our own vacancy rates against our nearby neighbors. I think it's also really interesting to look at the percentage of retail, the ratio, I guess, of retail versus office in Falls Church. And you're noting that it is balanced?
Yes.
As opposed to Tyson's, which has much more retail, and Arlington, which has much more
That was
office.
Tyson, that's much more office.
Office,
Yeah.
okay.
Either way. Both Tyson's and Arlington have about 5 or 6 times as much office as retail.
Right, so for many years, we've been trying, as we've been getting mixed-use developments, to add office, and we have not been all that successful. In the end, it may work out better for us that we don't have as much office that can then be empty. It would be nice to have a little more nice, fresh Class A office. But I appreciate those percentages because I think that helps as we think about what comes in the next building, what has been working for us.
Right.
That's all. That's my whole comment.
Okay. Other comments? All right, listen, thank you so much. We appreciate all the information you provided today, but the continuing relationship and the ability to use you as a resource as we navigate these challenging retail times. So thank you so much for coming this evening.
Thank you.
All right, let's move on to our Community Energy Action Plan. Mr. Shields, Mr. Young?
So I'll turn it directly over to Mr. Young, but we are really excited to have this before the City Council. We think we've really come a long ways. We've had a lot of public engagement on this plan, and we think one of the key things we want to get from this plan is a prioritized list of actions. There's a whole universe of things that we can do, and this planning process is helping us sort of to prioritize what we think will be most effective here in this community. Mr. Young, let me turn it over to you.
Thank you. Council members, appreciate the opportunity to come talk tonight. So building off Wyatt's introduction, this is a continuation of our planning work. It's a follow-on to the government energy plan, which we brought to you all and you all adopted it back in July. And so, Sophie, if you can do me a favor and pull up the slides, we'll just jump right into that. So. It's the second item. Thank you. Okay, so remind everybody what we're shooting for. So city, has adopted a series of greenhouse gas reduction goals. So a 50% reduction below 2005 levels by 2030. And an 80% reduction below those below 2005 levels by 2050. As we've looked at the kind of the makeup of where the emissions come from here in the city of Falls Church, 90% of those emissions come from transportation and buildings. And so when, why do people rob banks? It's because where the money is. Why are we looking at transportation and buildings, and why does our plan focus on those two areas? Because that's where most of the emissions are coming from. So the remaining 10% comes from kind of 3 primary areas, so waste and wastewater, refrigerants, and what they call fugitive emissions from natural gas, so natural gas leakage and things like that. So as Wyatt said, we've had a pretty extensive engagement process. We had a town hall up at Meridian High School back in April. Did the road show and circuit talking to a wide range of boards and commissions as well as groups of different employees through the summer. We had a virtual town hall in July, and the initial draft of the report we released back in September. We had a couple robust discussions with both the Planning Commission and the ESC in September, and their input and feedback, along with some extensive community feedback, helped with the version of this report that you all see here this evening. So the chart on the right is where the emissions have come from. That's 2005 levels through 2018 was relatively flat. We saw a reduction in 2020. 2020 was a little bit of an odd year. But from an emissions standpoint and the sectors of transportation and buildings, how do we break those down into actions that the city can take? And so we've identified 5 core strategies that kind of frame up our plan going forward. So the first 2 of those focus on transportation. The second 2 focus on buildings, and then the last one focuses on renewable energy that supports both of those. So from a transportation standpoint, there's basically 2 games to play. You can drive less, and then, once you've kind of done what you can there, you need to drive in zero emission vehicles, primarily electric vehicles today. So for each of these, we've tried to model out what an aggressive milestone for the city to shoot for, and so for number 1, so enhancing access to car-free alternatives, driving less. We're shooting for a 20% reduction in passenger car vehicle miles traveled. So this is based on one of the most aggressive assumption and goals that the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments set for the Washington region. I think we have a pretty good opportunity to shoot for that based on the makeup that we have here in the city of Falls Church. For electric vehicles, so 50% of new passenger vehicles purchased in the year 2030 will be electric. That goes to 100% in 2035, and that matches the California standard for what they're shooting for electric vehicles. On the building side of things, we're targeting a 13% reduction in building energy use, and we come up with that based on modeling two activities. So basically, an aggressive push into envelope improvements for buildings in the city. So thinking insulation improvements, window replacements, and the like as buildings are upgraded, as well as the end-of-life replacement of equipment. So when you think furnaces and air conditioners, hot water heaters, stove, gas stoves, things like that, when those pieces of equipment are at their end of the life and they need to be replaced, we want to help residents choose to go to a more efficient, sustainable options. So modeling that out based on kind of how many pieces of equipment in the city that we think that would be replaced in that fashion, that's what gets us to a 13% reduction in energy use in buildings. The fourth one is related to new construction. So this is, things the city can do to encourage energy efficient and low carbon development here in the city. And the last one is to increase on-site rooftop solar. So about 1.5% of buildings, residential buildings here in the city have rooftop solar today. Need to get to 5% by 2030, and I think 20% by 2050 in order to support the plan that we've laid out. So what does this get us? If we go to the next slide. So the chart here, we've kind of done 2 things. So it models out the reductions that we can get by 2030, and then it's flatlined from there to 2050, but it shows you proportionally what those different strategies will help us gain over time. And so VMT reductions with driving less, that's at the top, followed by vehicle electrification, buildings, rooftop solar, and the Virginia Clean Economy Act. So a huge driver for us, and what shapes some of the things we focus on here in the city of Falls Church is the fact that Dominion is required by law to clean up the electric grid over a period of time, and that's what is driving the yellow wedge there. What does leave us with a gap, right? So we've got a section here called additional actions, and those are the pieces to still figure out. So from the strategies I laid out on the previous page, that gets the city to a 30% reduction in emissions from 2005 levels by 2030 and 65% by 2050. So it's a little short of kind of what we were hoping to achieve. So we'll talk a little bit more about that on the next slide. So what's left, right? So we've kind of mapped out what the emissions are projected to be remaining in 2030 and then again in 2050. You can see in the 2030 bar, on-road transportation, the green bar is the biggest chunk, right? So the barriers to kind of making progress by 2030 are, there's 3 up here and I'll mention 4. So there's not a lot of time left between now and 2030 for the kinds of investments that our businesses and residents would need to make. So, combine that short period of time with the scale of adoption, for us to do more, we got to replace more equipment faster. So you're asking people to replace furnaces and cars and things that they wouldn't normally replace. And so we haven't done that, And then finally, the one I didn't put on the bullets up here, but the city's growing. And so that's also the challenge here is we're combating not only reducing the existing emissions, but offsetting the growth we're seeing in the city as well. So this is a big discussion point in particular with our ESC members a couple weeks ago. And kind of one of the way we talked about potentially mapping out a path forward with this is to, rather than kind of one and done with this plan, that we would revisit it in 2026 to see what our progress is and see what other opportunities are available to the city's residents and businesses at that time. And those can take the form of a number of different things, right? So technological developments, so one of the examples would be somebody figures out how to do renewable natural gas, right? Because offsetting, the use of what they call stationary fuels in our buildings it's a big challenge. That's the striped blue bar up there. But you can also see market changes. Some of this, equipment and technology is going to get cheaper and higher performing over time. And state or federal policy might change that helps drive some faster turnover of the equipment. And so I'll pause there. Maybe do you want to just hold questions to the end?
Yeah, why don't you keep going, and then we'll have questions about all of it.
Very good. So I'll do this really quickly, but I got a slide on each of the 5 strategies laid out before. So for each of the strategies, we've identified a series of actions that the city government can take here in the city to help its residents and businesses achieve the associated strategy, target, or milestone. So number 1, we're focusing on supporting car-free alternatives. So to get to a 20% reduction in vehicle miles traveled here in the city. A couple of these things the city's been talking about and working on already related to, being able to bike more safely and then continue to enhance pedestrian travel. But we're also proposing, to promote and expand the use of public transit, and then support what we call micro-mobility. So other forms of getting around town. So golf carts, scooters, electric bikes. There are things the city government can do to, with guidance on registration, piloting dedicated parking spaces, and there's more detail in the report, but it's a somewhat untapped, area of opportunity for us. So the second one is, supporting the shift to electric vehicles. So again, the 2030 target is for 50% of new vehicles purchased that year would be electric. One of the suggestions we've got kind of spread throughout here is to create what we call a one-stop shop for education and support. So it's kind of a range of different things that I think we can do here with city staff to provide information and support for residents making these decisions. Electric vehicles, we should consider, looking at our personal and property taxes and a potential incentive to provide financial incentive for people to make an electric vehicle decision. And then the big one in this area is really focusing on expanding the access to charging, both public charging and then charging in our multi-tenant buildings. Excellent. So for building efficiency and electrification, again, we're targeting a 13% reduction in energy use in our buildings. Again, a one-stop shop for education and support. I think in one of our previous meetings, we talked about like when your water heater goes out and then it becomes a crisis, and it's harder to make a switch to an electric water heater if you've got a gas one. How do we get information in people's hands ahead of time so they can think through making a different decision in those cases? We're proposing an energy audit program, both potentially in the future supporting businesses and residents, but sometimes people need some little help to know where to start. And this is a way for the city to help with that. We've got a commercial real estate tax exemption on the books. We want to look at that and see if there's an opportunity to focus that on energy efficient retrofits as an incentive. And then finally, there are a lot of programs out there to help low to medium income residents with weatherization and energy efficiency in their homes, and connecting those programs with buildings and building owners and residents is a challenge. But one of the opportunities we have here in the city is the city's a relatively small place. We can make a list. We know them all. And we can go talk to those buildings and make a connection and try and work through those issues individually. Next slide, please. So on new developments, we want to look at the special exception criteria. We've had a lot of success with that thus far. Maybe we need to continue. That's one of the topics that's come up a number of times in the ESC. One of the points, thinking globally and acting locally, is to look at zoning changes that promote density. I think that came up in the earlier discussion about the advantages that, if you live closer to where you work and where you eat and where you shop, like you don't necessarily need to drive a car. So there's again things that the city can do, and I think we're already talking about doing some of those. The city has a green home program on the books, but it's probably a little dated. The code requirements have kind of caught up with some of our expectations, so we're looking at how do we revamp that program to encourage the next generation opportunities there, as well as continuing to advocate for state code enhancements. Next slide. Rooftop solar, so continuing the one-stop shop theme. We have a solar equipment tax exemption on the books, but we really haven't used it. How can we revamp that to provide an incentive to folks? And then down the road, look at other financing options, and then the potential for community solar projects, which is linking up businesses or buildings that have the opportunity for solar with folks that want solar that can't put it on their own properties. Next. The last one's this is a lot of activity, similar to the government plan. We've got to track and measure and report what we're doing. So one of the key things I think talking with the ESC is continue to need to do more. So we want to come back to this. So part of the emphasis here is to update the community energy plan every 3 years going forward, and provide an annual status on our progress. It's a whole lot of stuff. So and I think one of the, I've heard from this group, I think the Planning Commission, is what should we focus on? What are the priorities? Where do we start? And so the next slide, out of all of these, here's what we've kind of outlined as potential, what we're recommending as next steps. So number one, focusing on the one-stop shop for education and support. So this is web content, social media campaigns, short educational videos using our FCCTV folks, tax mailing flyers and the like. Working with our building safety office on simplifying permitting guidance, as well as piloting some office hours for folks to bring up kind of specific questions about their buildings that I think we've got some really smart folks on staff that I think can help with that. And I think at least from a piloting stage, I think we can move forward with this one using existing resources. Number two, one of the points brought up in the Planning Commission meeting last month is, hey, we need a dedicated base of resources if we want to focus on this. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that in the budget amendment conversation later, but going forward, looking for, even if it's a modest amount of money, dedicated to moving forward with some of these activities. So we've got initial request that's, we're proposing to focus on an energy audit program for commercial businesses. The third one's core program management. So I think the tracking and reporting of both of these energy plans from this year is a bunch of work. We've got a number of government plan items already underway, and then the 2 items listed above. When we think about our core historical resources focused on environmental sustainability, that's what we've got the bandwidth to take on. And so then finally, as we kind of get into next year, there are 4 areas that we're proposing that enter the conversation for the next city council work plan. So EV charging support. So how do we help the multi-tenant buildings here in the city figure out how to provide EV charging for their residents and businesses? The low to medium income building improvements campaign I mentioned earlier, I think is a great opportunity, and it's something I think we can dive into. We talked about or proposed 3 tax-related incentives to consider. So I think we need to do some more homework on those and propose some specific items for the council to consider. So that would be a 3rd action. And the 4th is, the space of micromobility support. So how do we educate residents on the ability to use low-speed electric vehicles, golf carts here in the city? Do we revisit the scooter ordinance that's been talked about before? E-bike incentives in that bucket. And so these are the kinds of things that, stopping short of saying, hey, we need more staff, we'll need to kind of look at either reprioritizing existing activities or look for some resource enhancements to be able to take these on.
All right. With
that, happy to take any questions. Appreciate your patience as I kind of walk through that.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for that very thorough report and presentation and all the work you and the ESC have done over these past months, if not years, to get us where we are today. But I'm going to start with Ms. Hiscott.
Just want to re-echo the sentiments you just shared about thanking the ESC and you in particular, Andy. This has been just in the 3 years that I've served on the ESC, there's been a lot of more focused effort, and I think it's resulted in this particular plan and the consulting project overall, which is a great start. So thank you for that. I know if you look at the chart where we show our 2030 goals and how we're going to get there, there's that big, and you addressed it, the big gray additional actions area. I know, and I'll defer to my ESC colleagues and Planning Commission colleagues who are experts in that, but, trying to push a little bit more to see what we can do to define what those other actions could be, because obviously 2030 is only 6 years away. There were some ideas that were shared. We didn't have a chance to fully flesh them out in our last month's meeting. I anticipate this week that we'll hear a little bit more about, trying to get more information on that or push the consultants a little bit about what those other actions could be so we could hit those targets. And like I said, I'm sure we'll hear more from them between now and our next iteration of it. I wanted to talk about, staffing through this. We've talked about different ways to do that. And if we're really going to set this as a goal, if it's not dedicated staff, it needs to be dedicated priorities within staff descriptions. So, if you say one-stop shop and it's part of, the building safety code, and those people are going to be the ones who address that, like how do we, in their goals and objectives, make sure it's something that's as important as our community thinks it is, to make sure that we are aligning our resources with our priorities. Because it has historically not felt that way with environmental sustainability programs overall, like it's an afterthought with marketing or, because there's so much on so many people's plate. So I think there are going to be some difficult decisions we have to make as a council in terms of if it's not full-time staffing, if we're going to really hit these goals, if we're as serious as we say we are, and we put our money behind the programs that we've already invested in, we're going to have to do some deep digging on how we staff this. I think a one-stop shop sounds great, and in theory, but in practice, how do you put it into place where you actually have people who have this as a focus of their role and not just a sidebar? Because we know if for any of us, if you have 10 priorities and this is number 10, I can show you where my number 10 priorities, at least how far I've gotten on those, and it's not very far, a lot of years. So I think these are really important discussions to have. I don't want to lose sight of that. I think it's great to track our actions in, every couple of years, but we have to start with an aggressive plan now, obviously. That's going to take staffing. Who's going to start this, July 1st when we have budget approved to do this. And then lastly, and this is one I think is more easily addressed, is I know we had asked the consultants to look at the 2050 goal that we had already stated for reduction, which was 80% versus carbon neutral of 100% reduction. And as much as we love to say that we're leaders in a lot of areas, that's really not the goal. We're even behind the state's stated goal and all of the regional jurisdictions of carbon neutral by 2050. So I would like to reset that goal. We've talked about it some. I've talked about it more with others over the past week, that we really don't want to be behind where our state says our new 2050 goal, relatively new 2050 goal is. So I'd like to offer that we restate that and we at least match our regional goal and our statewide goal of carbon neutral by 2050. I think it's important to put that out there and to be putting pressure on those other actions. Where are we going to put the pressure at the state level or the federal level to be making policy changes that incent carbon neutral by 2050? So those are my comments for the moment. Any questions on my comments? We've already talked about some of this, I know.
No, I think, you and I talked about the revised 2050 goal. I think it's a great idea. I think we can draft up a separate resolution, for council to adopt if that's what you would like to do.
Yeah, that's what I personally would like to do that. So I can add that on. If it's not appropriate in this plan as a separate, I'd like to be combining those two action items.
Ms. Leon?
Thanks, Andy. This is really helpful. My questions are really around kind of tracking the community feedback, virtual town hall results. When you take a look at the mural boards, the top ranked actions, 13 and 11 votes were like home energy audit programs and personal property tax incentives for purchasing EVs. But I didn't see that laced into, maybe I missed it, to the next steps. So I just kind of want to understand, but those didn't fall off, did they? Or are they going to make it, is it just a time horizon for next steps?
Do me a favor.
Yeah.
So Ms. Leon, can you repeat the two of them for me and I'll hit
Yes, it was the home energy audit programs that got 13 votes in the town hall, and personal property tax incentives for purchasing EVs got 11 votes.
So I think the
two highest votes.
From a home energy audit standpoint, I think a good opportunity for us to hit that is to work on that in our one-stop shop approach. I think there's actually a federal tax credit out there for folks to do. It's not a ton of money, but for folks to do energy audits of their homes. So again, I think that's something we can promote for folks and steer folks on.
Okay.
And I think the second one was
personal property tax incentives.
So we've kind of hit on three potential tax avenues that the city could consider in the plan. So in our next steps, we're proposing, one of the things staff would work on next year is to kind of dig into the details and provide some more some more specific recommendations to council on what our options are there and what we can do.
Yeah, so I'm excited about this, right? Because I think the art in all of this is, I like the structure of the categories, right? It's, you've defined your 5 buckets and there's tangible kind of initiatives underneath them. I think from where I'm at, we can't do all, so it's the whole rack and stacking of outcomes, right? What gets us the most outcomes.
Correct.
Balancing all the costs. And so whatever, when that analysis kicks in, that creates more of a prioritized viewpoint around, okay, here's the levers, right? This is the long pole in the tent. We invest this amount of money in this particular lever. I mean, you're going to get this far. So is there intention to do that kind of analysis next in the next steps? I wasn't sure.
So I think the challenge we had with some of that is, okay, a personal property tax incentive, to pick one, right? how much of a tax incentive do we want to do, right? Like, and how much of it is, priority signaling on behalf of the city versus really trying to move the needle on people from a financial decision-making standpoint. There's the whole gamut of what you could do with that. And I the scope of this emissions model and work we've done here didn't have the bandwidth to dive into that level of detail with each of these actions. And so I think one of the, I think categories of feedback we've gotten, not particular over the last month, but kind of throughout the process is, well, what about this idea? And there are other things out there that we can do that do have a tie and an effect on emissions, but tying those back to the areas of biggest impact, we tried to kind of hone in with this report, focusing on the areas that we can make the biggest difference. It doesn't mean that some of those other potential topics aren't important and, the city shouldn't consider doing for other reasons, right? But when it comes to strictly for making an impact on emissions, these are the areas that we feel will make the biggest difference, and that's why we proposed them.
So I think another way for me to say this, and I respect the amount of work here, but when we talk about the discussion upcoming in council around funding headcount, right? Like I think you got to break that down, right? Around where specifically is that going to go? Is it 1? Is it 2? What along these 5 levers is that person working on? Because it's a great plan, but I think I'm looking for how to map it to tangibly what are we doing first, what are we doing second, right? And having a little bit more structure and guardrails to move it from plan to structuring some execution to it. So that's really my suggestion next in terms of how do we move this forward, right? Supporting Ms. Hiskett's notion of, I think we should talk about it and see what kind of investments we need to make. Right.
All right. Other comments? Ms. Hardy?
Thank you, Andy. This is great. So broad comments first. So overall, I really like how planful and deliberate you are. I think for the community who's paying attention, I think you're honing in on buildings and transportation. That's really important because those things are the ones that actually move the needle. And I think there are a lot of actions that we think we're doing to be kind of eco-friendly and green, but if I can use the word, they're kind of performative because at the end of the day, it's really changing our behaviors with how we get around and what we do in our buildings that make the biggest difference. So I think that needs to be kind of communicated far and wide. Because especially this is the community energy plan. So I think that was great how you kind of organized it with your 5 buckets and then specific actions. I would +1 what Debbie said around setting a more ambitious goal. I think the carbon neutral goal by 2050 I had raised back when you came to us with the government energy plan. I would support that. I know that the 80% one is a COG goal, but clearly I think everyone's moved beyond that. So I think I'd like us to match kind of what our partners are doing in the region. More specifically, can we go to the slide with the wedge? The colored wedges. So if I'm understanding this correctly, the green wedge is the biggest kind of room for where we could reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Is that right? That's
correct.
Vehicle, that's the green hash mark one, vehicle electrification.
So I would say that the element that's kind of reflected up here that makes the biggest impact is the cleaning up of the electric grid that's required due to the Virginia Clean Economy Act.
That one we don't do anything for because that's already adopted, right?
Correct.
Yes, so that's a yellow, but for what we can locally control, it's the combination of the solid green and the hash mark.
That is correct.
That makes more of an impact than buildings.
Particularly as you get into the out years to 2050, that's correct.
Got it. So taking that data into account, how does that map towards the 5 buckets and then the 24 actions under each of the 5 buckets? Or 20 actions, right? Because while you have 5 buckets that call out EVs, car-free alternatives, electrified buildings, like to Caroline's point around prioritizing, like if we're going to see the most impact from changing the way we get around with cars, reducing, gas vehicles, et cetera, should we throw a lot more effort into there versus buildings, right? Like, is that a good lens to essentially prioritize? Because all the actions, all 20-some actions you have are really great and important, but we probably have to prioritize. And is it really then transportation that's going to be our biggest bang for our buck if the green wedges are the biggest impact?
Right. Yep.
So that would be kind of one lens I'd offer is, again, go back to, while I'd like to get to everything, and they're all really important, if transportation's really where we need to focus, then rather than, the energy audits are great, especially because I like the lens of focusing on kind of our low to moderate income communities. But again, if it's really about sidewalks, bikes, micromobility, getting people out of single occupancy car, gas vehicles, then let's throw a lot more energy into that. So that would be my one suggestion. Second, in the staff report and not in this deck, you had talked about really specific changes like around, we need between 200 and 350 heat pumps, 200 water heaters, 60 whole home energy efficiency. How do we track progress against those? Is that something that we're expecting the community to be able to report into us? Or in general, how do we track progress? Because I love that there's a category to track progress, because without, it's great to set goals, but then if you don't track, you don't know how you're doing against them, right?
So we talked about some of this, with the ESC on we should have metrics for all of these things. And so there are certain pieces of this that are relatively easy. I'll use easy loosely, but they're possible for us to track with data that the city collects today, right? We have really good information on vehicle registrations in the city. You can run an analysis of all the VIN numbers of vehicles registered in the city of Falls Church, and it will spit out how many electric vehicles and how many plug-in hybrid electric vehicles are owned in the city. I think there were 274 of them as of the end of 2022. So we have good data on that, right? Another example of one I think we can have pretty good data on is rooftop solar installations. You got to get a permit.
That one we have permits for, right?
Right? So we can, the building safety staff runs an annual report for the COG folks on how many solar installations. So we have good data on that. As you get into what kind of water heater people have in their homes, it's a lot harder. One of the elements that some folks in the community had suggested that we put in the report, it's in the kind of tracking and reporting section 6, is updating our building property assessment database. So when we do real estate assessments, that we try and capture more of that information. There you go, 6.2, thank you. And so over time, that's a way for us to get better information on what the makeup of that is here in the city. That's a long play, we don't get, you don't have to get a permit to get a new water heater, those kinds of things. And so capturing that data over the long term, I think we have a path to doing, capturing it over the next couple of years. Did we get the 150 water heaters installed last year? There's not a great answer for that right now.
Okay. And then so going back to the point about if changing the way we get around is ultimately going to be the biggest impact or one of the biggest impacts, two specific ideas. I like that we are talking about, EV charging and potential tax incentives or personal property tax reductions, but especially using our equity lens, not everyone can afford a car, especially not an electric car. And so I would love for us to think about incentives for bikes and electric bikes and micromobility. And so if we're going to incentivize people buying electric cars, let's think about other forms of transportation too. Second, which is an idea I think that's been talked about for a while, is how do we encourage our students to use public transit? And while as much as we like our electric school buses, if we can actually reduce the number of school buses on the ground, on the streets as well, and just use Metrobus, because the 28A and the 3T run up and down Route 7 already, that seems like another kind of low-cost way to pilot getting our students to use transit and start changing that behavior. So two kind of tactical ideas, but again, going back to the theme of how do we get people, changing the way we get around is ultimately, I think, what this council's talked a lot about, especially in walkability and bikeability. And as we see here, has a really great impact on greenhouse gas emissions as well. So overall, really nice work. Thank you for this plan. I'm excited to start funding this and get this underway.
Thank you.
Mr. Duncan?
All good thoughts already shared. Just one more to add on my end, and this is a question that maybe it might best be discussed when we start talking about the budget, but it's relevant, I think, to this. So, Andy, if everybody agrees that driving less is a good thing, we've got a 20% goal to drive 20% less. Can we provide tax incentives to our residents to do so through the personal property tax, which I assume means the car tax? If I am driving 20% less, could I see financial benefit from that in my pocket through self-reporting or through, I don't know, some technology that's just around the corner that's going to actually measure the number of miles that I drive my car? I mean, I remember sitting in Saslaw's office and hearing, the discussion in Richmond about the gas tax, is sort of outmoded now because we've got more efficient vehicles, but people are still driving a number of miles, so we need to track miles, not simply tax through the amount of gas that you buy. Locally, does our personal property tax, car tax process open itself to the possibility that we could tell people, look, give us your odometer reading when you file for your personal property tax, and we'll take that into consideration when we levy the amount that you owe.
I think that's not something we've discussed before, so that's something I think we could look into, but appreciate the suggestion.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Conley?
Thanks for this, Mr. Young and the ESC. I appreciate that you think big and you have very specific solutions to get to the big results. I think those specific solutions are really important. Just a thought related to the number of electric water heater. Well, two things: electric water heaters, and somewhere you mentioned here voluntary concessions and including things in voluntary concessions. And I'm pretty sure we said that Founders Row 2 is a 100% electric building, right? So that's going to have electric water heaters.
I believe so.
Right. So there you go. There we got 150 electric water heaters. So with that problem's done. We could get some more, but I think that that's really important too, as you go into voluntary concession negotiations, to make sure that these things are all in there. And I know you mentioned that somewhere, and I think that's one that we really should keep an eye on and include going forward. And then the second one is, as you were talking, I was thinking, I could switch to an electric water heater when I need a new one. I wonder how I do that. And, I could, a golf cart, I wonder how I do that. And how would I get EV charging? So I think your one-stop shop is a great idea, because all of that is intimidating to try to figure out how much it's going to cost. How do I do it? Who are the vendors that'll do it for me? How does it fit into my budget? But if there is a one-stop shop, I do think that would be really effective. To be able to educate people on how they can do those things, because they are different and they require kind of a different kind of math and thinking and understanding of the point and what you're trying to do. So I like that one-stop shop very much.
All right. Mr. Snyder, do you have a comment?
Sure. Thanks a lot. So I decided I'd cut my greenhouse gases by 83% by using Amtrak to get to and from New York, which was a great idea, but they were consistent 2 hours late yesterday and 2 hours late today, but on a humorous side. But yeah, I think the transportation sector is an area. I think we really are going to have to look at some sort of micro-mobility approach. I think we need to enable people that can bike, people that can walk, but a lot of people, for one reason or another, can't do that. So it's very important that we take a holistic view of all of our population. And the notion of encouraging school kids to use transit again, that's really good, but I think we need to provide a more comprehensive transit. So I think we may be back to the George system in one way or another in the future, using higher tech vehicles. So I just wanted to make those comments. The other comment is to reduce not only our greenhouse gases, but to reduce the greenhouse gases of people who come in here, which is the role of the BRT and other elements, so that making it really convenient for people to use options to motor vehicles. Now, they all won't, and our businesses need that business, but I think we ought to work sub-regionally with Fairfax County, Arlington, and Alexandria to see how we can best make it possible for people who want to use our businesses to come in and not drive. Now, again, some probably will, but I think that's another part of it. It's not only working on our greenhouse gases, but the greenhouse gases of people that we want to come here and use our businesses.
No, I appreciate that, and I think we've talked, in the ESC meeting about the opposite is also true. Residents here in Falls Church also need to go other places as well, right? And so, being plugged into that regional picture is important.
Right, that's the whole thing about BR2. Yep.
So just to wrap up, I have just one or two comments. I would suggest that special exceptions and voluntary concessions are something that we have not fully maximized in terms of our utility or use for sustainability goals. I do spend a fair amount of time in Arlington, and I would just give you a few examples of things that are common in their voluntary concessions. Things like, for example, a transit kiosk, and it's basically required in all buildings. So when you go downstairs, wherever you're in the lobby, it's going to let you know all the different transit options you have. As part of TDMs, transportation demand management plans, it's very common to require developers to give Metro fare cards to people when they get in a building to kind of kickstart them to start using Metro. And so that could be the same thing for bike share. In other words, requiring people who do a new building to get bike share for everyone in the building, as part of the new tenants when they come in. There's a lot of things like that are in there, and I'm not going to go through the whole list, but if you don't mind, maybe I'll send you over their, quote, standard voluntary concessions or standard site plan conditions.
That'd be great.
And I think there's some things in there that we might be able to do that we maybe haven't thought of just yet.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. I'll copy everyone else if you have interest as well. Okay, well, listen, thanks so much. We look forward to the continuing conversation, the dialogue, ESC's leadership, your leadership in this issue as well. I look forward to further conversations.
Thank you all.
All right, let's move on to our next item, zoning text amendments. Is that Mr. Stoddard or is that Mr. Trainer or both?
So we will have Mr. Stoddard and Mr. Trainer join us. Ms. Ruzzi is under the weather, and so she will not be joining us. So what we hope to get into a regular habit with council on is to just do regular cleanups of the zoning code, sometimes correcting issues that have been in the code for many years, that and sort of get into a regular rhythm of looking through the code for those types of improvements to it. And so what we do have before the council tonight are things that we think are just in the nature of cleanup. We don't think they are particularly substantive or controversial. But let me turn it over to Mr. Stoddard for a review of what they are and a discussion of what the request of the council is on them.
Before we get to that, if we could just interrupt just for a second. We had a citizen who sent us an email sort of along these lines about T-zones and zoning amendments that might be necessary, zoning ordinance amendments that might be necessary. I know we'd spoken about that briefly before. Would you like to just give a quick statement just so that there's any member of the public who had an expectation or thought that was needed immediately, what the conclusions either of staff or city attorney, which may be ongoing or developing, are, at least at this time?
So the city attorney has shared with the city council she does not believe that there are any errors or defects in the T-zone ordinance that was adopted recently by the city council. And I think that's kind of the bottom line on it. We had some questions just about it in terms of townhouses and their status under the new T-zones, and we can discuss that as well, but that's not on the docket for items that are being considered right now. We did look at those concerns prior to the council taking action on T-zones. We didn't think it was necessary for there to be language in the ordinance to address those townhouse concerns. We can revisit that with the residents just to talk them through that, but that was the judgment that we reached when we considered those letters that we received prior to the council's action on the T-zone ordinance.
All right, thank you. That's come up most recently, I think today or yesterday, from a citizen, so I appreciate the update on that. Sorry to interrupt you, Mr. Stoddard. Look forward to your presentation.
No, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Shields. Thank you, Mayor, members of council. Just to repeat a little bit of what Manager Shields was saying is that with the recent reorganization, getting more complete staffing under the zoning shop, we are able to do a better job of logging sort of inconsistencies between city code or state code or keeping tallies of where are common things that people run into problems with clarification clarification errors or clarity errors on the city's code. And you'll see that some reflected in the staff report, some included in the attachment. And so the idea is to get into a cycle of regularly sort of reviewing and updating, especially those items that are most pressing or the ones that most impact property owners in the city. But with that, I'll turn it over to our case planner on this one, Mr. Jack Trainer.
Thank you, Mr. Stoddard. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of council. Tonight, City Council is requested to review and provide feedback on proposed minor amendments to the zoning ordinance. These minor amendments are intended to clarify meaning where ambiguity has been identified in the course of administering the ordinance, reflect changes in the Virginia State Code, and remove kind of general errors altogether, which we're calling zoning cleanup items. Staff's recommendation tonight is that council review and provide guidance on the proposed zoning ordinance cleanup items and schedule first reading and referral to the Planning Commission for the October 23rd council meeting, which is next Monday. By way of background, the best practices in zoning require regular review of the zoning ordinance. This kind of regular cleanup is scheduled to stay current with state code and to increase clarity and address any ambiguity in the code. Zoning and planning staff have identified several items in the zoning ordinance in need of adjustment. Those reflected in the staff report in front of you tonight in the table beginning on line 20, as well as in the attachment, where we've identified some more complex adjustments that will be brought back to council for consideration at a future date. But again, the items under consideration beginning tonight are all listed in the table beginning on line 20, which I'll go through now. The first topic is about advertising requirements for special use permits and zoning applications. The issue is that our city code has run out of date with the state regulations. So the proposed amendment substantively kind of updates the minimum number of advanced days notice for newspaper ads and written notice requirements, again, around advertising for SUP and zoning applications. The second topic is variance criteria, which similarly our code is out of date with the state code. And so what's being proposed is an amendment to bring in the newer state language into our variance language. This includes a definition of a variance, which we didn't have before, included in the zoning definition section of the zoning ordinance. The third topic is the official design zoning district. And today, the OD district includes a sub-area within the zoning district called the historic area. This is the kind of triangle where the historic Falls Church is located. It has Broad Street to the north, Washington to its west, and Fairfax Street to its southern border. So it's that kind of triangle, and that's where the OD historic district lies. Permitted uses under the OD Historic District are telescopes to T1 in the current code, and the city just recently updated the T1 district, and so what the proposed amendment is to, instead of referencing T1 in the OD district, is to instead spell out what those permitted uses are today. And so when the T1 updates go into effect in the new year, the OD district wouldn't be affected. The fourth topic is regarding a footnote in the height and yard table for particularly describing front yard setbacks for commercial properties with frontage on Broad and Washington Street. A 2013 amendment increased that setback from 14 feet to 20 feet for commercial properties, again with frontage on Broad and Washington. But in that update, it kind of muddled the language a little bit and shuffled things around, so the syntax was a little difficult, or kind of left itself open to interpretation. And so, again, in order to kind of underscore its interpretation about how that front yard setback is measured, that language is included there. Distance shall be measured from the face of the curb to the nearest point of the face of the building. That language is just being brought to the beginning of the footnote, so it's clear how that's applying and not in the second half kind of buried in that footnote as it exists today. And the fifth topic is regarding street side yards and interior side yards. These are terms that are outdated and no longer apply in the zoning ordinance today. And this relates to corner lots where before we had a front yard and what was then referred to as a street side yard or interior side yard. Today, for corner lots, we have 2 front yards and 2 side yards. That's the interpretation of the zoning ordinance today, and it's in the definitions section of the yards section. So this update is purely just removing reference to street side yard and interior side yards because they no longer apply. The last topic for consideration are codification errors pertaining to waiver provisions and landscape requirements section. Kind of similarly, a prior update shuffled the structure of the zoning ordinance, and so the language in this section is just referencing the wrong kind of organizational term. And so it's literally just replacing reference to section with division and subsection to section as is more appropriate with how the actual layout of the zoning ordinance is written today. So I'll go to the timing section, which begins on line 82. Again, as kind of staff has mentioned, these are seen as kind of clerical updates to the zoning ordinance, and so the schedule kind of reflects that. Following the work session tonight, council again is requested to schedule a first reading for next Monday's meeting, the 23rd. And if so, then the rest of the schedule appears following that, which would be the Planning Commission would have a work session on November 1st with a public hearing at its November 15th date. And then council would see these items again for final consideration on December 11th. So that, Mr. Mayor, I'll turn it back to you. Thanks.
Thanks, Mr. Trainer. It is nice that it's just important to do these kind of cleanups as we go along. I just want to clarify the official design district change. And as you explained it, then I looked down at the note that starts on line 37. And I just feel like this one may concern people who are concerned about the transition zone. So what I'm reading is that what's going to happen is you're going to change the description of what can happen in the OD district. And it's going to stay exactly the way it is. It's not going to change when the T-zones change.
That's correct. So what the proposed amendment is instead of referencing T1, we would take all the uses that are allowed in T1 today and just list them out under the OD district. And so those uses wouldn't change.
Okay, so there's no concern about any changes to the OD district?
Correct,
Just
there's no change in use.
changes to the wording. Thanks.
All right, other questions or comments, Ms.?
Not to sound too simple-minded, but being a simple-minded person, can somebody explain to me what is the official design district conceived to do? Preserve, encourage? How is it used? Is it the same sort of mishmash that transitional zoning was, or is there something I can point to and say, oh, there's an official design building, that's dandy, we want more of those?
It's a pretty limited, small district, so in that way, it's like T-zones. There's two sections. The OD district has a municipal area and historic area. That's what these two sub-areas make up the entire zoning district. And only the historic area has reference to T1, which is what we're talking about here. That area is entirely encompassed by the that kind of triangle area that I was describing earlier, where the Falls Church Episcopal Church is. There's several commercial uses. There's a townhouse OD kind of community there. I think it's Churchview. Yeah. And I actually went back to the original legislation, which was enacted in '66, and it describes, a lot what the areas that fall under this historic area is. And so really, there's obvious historical uses there. Things are important to the city. So as far as I can tell, the language for the OD district is meant to for preservation purposes. Again, it includes the church. The municipal area includes City Hall, where we are now, and I believe Cherry Hill and some of the other uses kind of in proximity. That's the municipal area, so this language doesn't even apply to what we're considering. But from the intent use, again, that was included in that original ordinance. Preservation was a large focus of it.
So if there is such a thing as a ye old with an E Falls Church, the official design district is meant to recognize it, preserve it, and in the case of the Muse, the housing, the condo project, to encourage new versions of it. If there is redevelopment on any of the land that's within that triangle, is that right?
Yeah, there's also, I think, language unique to the OD district where that doesn't appear in some of the other districts, at least that I can tell, that has certain review parameters around things like architecture and official design. I think it defines that, or that's described elsewhere in the zoning ordinance. That's just extra kind of, particular about how the design actually appears in those districts more than any others.
Okay, but it does not extend as far as like the Christian Science Reading Room or any of the buildings that are...
Not the historic area. I believe the municipal area covers that.
Okay.
Property. Which would apply to those same kind of review things, but just the uses listed there are different.
Okay. Well, obviously, it's just an area that I've not really learned that much about because we've been busy remaking the city, but I would, since our T-zone experience was what it was, I would appreciate a broader understanding in the community of what, because I have heard people say, oh, well, we can't do something somewhere because that's an official design district, or we need to be consistent with the official design district, which is right across the street or whatever. And I think it's important for these little odd pocket zone things that were done in the 60s, which is quite a long time ago, to make sure that they're relevant to current conditions, market realities, community desires. I just want to make sure that I don't do anything right now that 30 years from now people will say, oh, well, the council was very firm about that. Maybe the council just didn't really engage on that. And so I would encourage us to engage on that to the degree that we can and make sure there's a community understanding of what we're doing there. Okay, thank you.
Ms. Harding.
Thank you, Jack and Paul. I was catching up on the public comment, so I wanted to make sure that we address and are responsive to both public comments that we've gotten about the zoning cleanups. I think one we talked about at the beginning of the meeting where I think there was a resident who had a concern that there was errors in the T-zone ordinance, which I think why it's clarified that the city attorney's opined that there is no issue. But the substantive part of it I thought was important to address as well, because it had to do with, should the townhouses on Park burn down, what happens? And I think right now the city attorney's concluded that if that happens, the townhouses on Park Avenue may be rebuilt should they be significantly destroyed. So I think that's worth making sure people understand. So if I could make a request to Wyatt and maybe Sally to follow up with the public comment we received based on that assessment, that would be great. The other public comment we got had to do with the public notice requirement and points out that why are we just pointing to state code versus specifying exactly the public notice procedures? This one reminds me of when we updated the T-zone ordinance and said, hey, we're just going to point to state code on what the tree requirements is, because as state code changes, we want to make sure we're always up to date and not having to do this cleanup. Is that the same line of thinking on why we did that?
Yeah, that's correct. State code changes, and when it does, we should be amending our zoning ordinance, and so sometimes it is just a cleaner connection to reference state code, but we could be more specific perhaps about calling out the section of state code, or we could look at ways that might make that clearer while still making it an efficient kind of connection.
Yeah, I like that approach of maybe just calling it the section of state code rather than specify all the details, because like you said, state code will change and I'd have to go and update our zoning code to match every time. My second question, so thank you for that, has to do with the future cleanup items. That's a separate attachment that has lots of other things on there. Is that proposed to be kind of a work plan item, or when are we going to get to some of these? And so in particular, like the sign ordinance, which I mentioned earlier when our retail consultant was here, talked about how that could be a place where we could help promote more economic development and help business activity because our sign ordinance might be a bit outdated for the kind of development we're doing today. When are we going to get to these fun zoning changes?
I would suggest that, we were trying to do a filter on things that were non-substantive and probably non-controversial. I think all of our experience is that sign ordinances are controversial, or meaning that there's a lot of community interest in them and a lot of business interest in them. So I think that would be a good thing for the council to take on as a council work plan discussion with the next term, because I think we can anticipate that it would take, be of great interest.
Okay. So for all of them, you think that they would be council work plan items, or there's some that you're going to propose around 2 to come?
So we could go through the list and the council could sort of exert its judgment on these, but I think the ones that aren't before you right now are all ones that we think probably merit a work plan discussion.
Okay. Sorry. Okay, thank you.
All right, other comments? I would just caution as to the specific code section. It's not uncommon in Virginia law that they actually recodify, so the 28.2 whatever, 6 years from now ends up being stuck in a different section. So you can address that. I know Sally's a pro with all that, but just a bit of caution and being a little careful on that. But otherwise, thank you for this work so far and what you're going to continue to do. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, let's move on to the next item, which is Mr. Shields.
So on a quarterly basis, we circle back with council just on progress on council work plan items and sort of major high visibility CIP items. I want to invite Caitlin Saubsey up here to the desk, and Ms. Mester and Ms. Saubsey are going to provide the report tonight.
Hi. Good evening, Council. Excited to be here. I'm Caitlin Saubsey, CIP Grants Manager. I'm here with Cindy Mester, Community Relations and Legislative Affairs. And we are presenting tonight the October 2023 work plan and some CIP updates as well. I actually prepared some slides tonight. They're not in your packet, but they just summarize what's in the staff report. So Sophie, I think I'm going to have you bring that up, and we'll just keep that up. And that will help us sort of walk through the memo and the work plan, and then afterwards we can bring those back up if we need to. Tonight, like I said, Cindy and I are talking about the City Council 2-year work plan. I added this, we're just jumping right in. The first slide is sort of an overview that I added. Working on the work plan update for October. We had some newer staff, and we actually had some requests to maybe add a legend to the work plan that described how it works. And so we did not get that in this time, but that's something I think we intend to do next quarter. So I just provided here just a summary of what the work plan is, how it advances city vision and goals. It was this fiscal year 23 to 24 work plan was adopted October 8th, 2022. It's informed by the annual budget, capital improvements program, comprehensive plan, small area plans, and master plans. It prioritizes policies and projects to deliver over a 2-year period. We report those updates quarterly, and it uses a Gantt-style bar chart that illustrates the project and initiative schedules, initiation from activity in progress in light green to completion in dark green. Thank you. This October 2023 status report reports progress since the June update. It also consolidates, same as the last report, consolidates the CIP snapshot and uses the traffic light method of reporting in the notes column, and provides a summary of changes in lights. We added an additional summary of changes in those traffic lights since the June update, and what we're calling a quarterly running estimate. And this update also provides additional detail on CIP funding and management, which we'll get into. But I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Mester now.
Thank you, Caitlin. We'll wanted to highlight next is the new ad that came out of the June discussion of the work plan, sort of a quick synopsis by color and sort of what changed. So in this chart, you can see that we have less green and more blues, which means green, it was active, blue means it's completed. So we've had a significant amount of projects that we were able to complete since your June update, and also one less red. Now there are more reds because of some staffing and funding constraints, which we'll highlight here, but you'll also see in your budget discussion. So just for a few highlights of what was accomplished in the blues, the completed ones, we've listed 4 there for you. There's 2 yellow ones that changed from green to yellow. They're both transportation, and they're in the budget amendment before you this evening. And the red ones are ones where we've talked about before, like the rapid response team, where it's just been challenging to recruit those positions. So moving then to the next slide, we do have 12 pages of projects that are in the full legal size document. We're not going to go through those this evening, but we will entertain, of course, any questions that you have or follow-up that you may want. On the non-CIP items, just wanted to highlight 4 this evening. Of course, the East End Area Plan, the POA, you all know was adopted, and that's very exciting, and that moves that last POA forward. We have public art initiatives proceeding with the Arts and Humanities Council working on the procedures that we hope to have done by the end of this year. I will note in the work plan there was a typo. It's 2023, not 2024. We will work to complete that this year. And of course, we're working on the traffic signal boxes and additional money coming forward. We've recently had updates on the affordable housing. One is the 2 homeownership closings that we've had on that Amazon grant. And we're working through the Virginia Village project with Wesleyan Virginia Housing, and we'll have more details on that following a productive meeting we had with Virginia Housing today. And at your last work session, you had an update on the demographic study. So a lot of good progress is coming together that you see at different meetings. The work plan gives you a summary. Now back to Caitlin for a few just quick highlights on the CIP.
Right, so some CIP specific work plan updates. Broad Street Multimodal on page 4 was authorized for the right-of-way phase in September of 2023. We anticipate a 10-month schedule for that, and that's cutting it pretty close. It's we're acquiring 29 parcels for that project, some of them temporary construction easements, some of them permanent easements to expand the sidewalk. And we've added $1.5 million in funding from a federal earmark to that project. We are still seeking $375,000 local match funds for that, which is also in the budget amendment. North Washington and Columbia, which is also both on page 4 of the work plan, is ready to award, almost ready to award construction contract. I think that staff will be seeking council approval to award a contract at the next meeting. And we anticipate construction starting in spring of 2024. We've also added funding to that project. It's been on our shortfall list. And we've added additional revenue sharing funds that we requested from VDOT. We also have to provide a local match for that. So that is also in the budget amendment. Broad Street Hawks is in the construction phase, hasn't broken ground yet, but it is in the phase of construction due to long lead items. There was one notice to proceed issued in May, and I think they're getting ready to issue the final notice to proceed in late October or November, so right around the corner. Also greening of Lincoln on page 6 of the work plan in the stormwater and sustainability section is in, planning and design is underway on that project. Public outreach is targeted for winter of 2023 and also spring of 2024 with construction anticipated in summer of 2024. We've also added some funds in the stormwater program with some a recent community request. It was in the state budget for Harrison Branch, so lots of good work going on in the CIP. You can go to the next slide. It lays out in the staff report or memo, this is a table of CIP funding shortfalls, sort of an update on the last table and the June update. As it mentions in the report, some of the projects in the June funding shortfall table have been resolved and are no longer experiencing funding shortfalls. Some of them still have funding shortfalls, and those are included here. The latter of those that I mentioned earlier, Broad Street Multimodal and North Washington and Columbia, will be in the budget amendment. So this just provides more details on the projects, when they were first applied for funding. I think that's a really important part of telling the story of CIP funding issues right now. North Washington and Columbia, for example, the application year was fiscal year 14. That means it was probably late 2013, so we're looking at 10 years ago. Our initial budget and estimate for the application for that project was $600,000. Our current engineer's estimate is 1.834. So significant cost increases in the last decade, which isn't surprising. We've also included the two tables in green, maybe you can tell that's green, for additional funds awarded. So that illustrates funds that we've already added to those projects in the prior year, and also some in fiscal year 24, the current fiscal year, either through mostly requesting additional grant funds or applying for additional grant funds, and then some local, general funds that we've added through budget amendments in the past. The white column at the end there is our current budget, what's currently funded, and then in yellow we have the existing shortfalls, if any. So you can see at the bottom, the total funding awarded overall for all of these projects is over $6.5 million. The current shortfall we have is $3.1 million, most of that being from the community center HVAC. In the next slide, this is the CIP workload and funding overview. This is a table that was presented previously to council by the city manager on October 2nd. It just illustrates all the active projects and new and future CIP projects that we have planned in the whole 10-year look ahead right now. I just wanted to highlight the 41 active projects that we're managing right now. It also goes into more detail in the staff report. We have a total equivalent of 6 full-time project managers right now who are managing those 41 projects. And then we'll talk a little bit more about some project management and delivery strategies on slide 11. But if you go to the next slide, also in the staff report, inflation-related cost increases remain a trend in the CIP. That's mostly where we're seeing the cost increases that were on that last table of shortfalls. Other project management and delivery challenges include just a few. Schedule delays is a big one. Time is money, obviously. That includes COVID-related delays. We're still working some active projects that were affected by COVID schedule-wise. The age of the grant or funding, as I mentioned, staff vacancies and turnover, contractor performance issues, that has impacted a few of those projects on that shortfall list, and availability of long lead items, as well as right-of-way cost increases. I think we can go to the next slide. Right? Some strategies for CIP funding and management and project delivery. Some strategies have included increasing outsourcing. We have requested VDOT to administer the 2 bridge projects on Sharrow Avenue and Oak Street. I believe staff is requesting 2 project manager contractors for the remainder of fiscal year 24. As far as project funding strategies which don't burden the general fund are always prioritized. Additional VDOT balance fund requests We've been working really well with VDOT district staff, Northern Virginia. When additional funds are needed and we have a deficit, we reach out to them first, and they let us know if if there are available funds in the balance fund for that particular funding program, and make a request to central office on our behalf. And we've had really good success with that. Earmarks and other new community request opportunities, we've secured a few of those that we're sort of infusing into our existing CIP and finding projects that align with those funds, and surplus funds from completed CIP projects when available. We've made a couple transfers like that just in the last year. And I think that's all. Oh, yeah, I think, yeah, that's all. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you. A lot going on.
Yeah.
Let's hear from the gang and see if anyone's got any questions or comments for you. Ms. Hardy?
Thank you. I think this is, I always say this is like my favorite topic every quarter, because I think this is what our residents see on the ground a lot, and they often have a lot of questions about it. So, but first, general comment. I think we've really just come a long way in terms of how we manage work plan and CIP. Goes to Cindy and Wyatt and Caitlin for kind of helping us be more well-managed with kind of a dashboard and grading things and reporting out on status of projects compared to where we did this 5 years ago. I think this is really important snapshot that we get every quarter. So thank you for that. If I understood correctly, so back in June when we last got the quarterly update, we had 7 projects that had pretty big budget issues. Now we are just down to 3 because we've secured grant funding to close the gap on 4 projects. Is that right?
Mostly.
Mostly. Okay. So for the projects where we got additional funds awarded, while it's good that we found ways to close the gap, does that come with extra red tape or resources to essentially use those dollars? Because I know we want to go after that free money, but I am cognizant that sometimes a lot of that grant funding also becomes harder to administer. And so I want to make sure we're realistic about the resources needed just because we close the dollar side of things.
Sure. I think we have plans to expand grant management staff already. That should be happening very soon in the current fiscal year. That's in the FY24 budget. So I feel really good about the grant management and administration part. Project management, we obviously still struggle with. I think that the 2 contractors, it'll be really good to get that help and see how successful that is. And maybe that's something, we implement again in the future and reproduce. I don't know. Did that answer your question?
And if I could just add a little bit, your point is very well taken, because the color of money does impact the work, and you've heard us talk about federalizing a program. So we are very conscious when we go after the additional money that, like the money that Ms. Sopsey was mentioning, is usually state money and it goes to a state. But if we're going to get federal money, then we put it on a project that already has federal money. So as much as we can, which is a majority of the time, we don't quote federalize a project that's not already have federal money on it.
Okay, so as long as we're cognizant of that, because I know that it's a hard conversation to say, hey, we can't do this project, and you'd rather go out and find the money for it. But if that money comes with a lot of strings attached and more resources, then maybe it's not really that free. And so I think that's just an important conversation to have. On that note, I think we have 41 projects with 6 CIP PMs, and what's proposed is kind of 2 additional kind of term limited contractors to help out. So broad top of the house question, is 41 projects for 6 CIP PMs a realistic amount of workload?
I don't think so. No, I don't believe so. I mean, so the projects really vary, I think, in size and complexity and program. I mean, we have 2 project managers in stormwater. They're managing, I think, 9 of those 41 projects, maybe. And they're doing really well. That's successful. That's a good model. In other areas, I think there are more challenges.
Okay. So again, this is one of those, again, hard conversations, right? Which is, should we hire more PMs, hire temporary PMs? Should we reprioritize projects and try to get the ones that we've committed to done and just take on less? And so I would challenge us to have that conversation instead of just, I think it sounds like right now we are recommending a couple of term limited contractors to help. But in the next work plan, I think it's important for us to be realistic about what we want to get done, and either have the right resources allocated against it or tell us to take on less.
And I believe we have that process underway. We've already started talking about what's the right resourcing of the CIP as we develop the CIP. If you look at the project chart right now, we have 41 active, but in the next 6 years it's 43. So it has gone down in that effort, but it's still not to a rough estimate of 4 projects per PM. We're still above that, and hence the budget requests that Mr. Young, Mr. Stoddard, and Mr. Bradley have been talking about that's in the budget request coming forward to you, so we can manage now and then reassess going forward what it will look like and needs to look like before the CIP is back before the Planning Commission and Council.
And I realize it's hard to say no to the 7 of us because we like a lot of these projects and they're important for the community, but I'd almost rather we try to get things done and do them well than try to have a whole bunch of things that we're not getting done. Now, talking out the other side of my mouth, I also like the approach of using contractors. And so I think I've advocated for that before, especially while we have 3 projects underway. That's going to throw a lot more operating dollars out there. But in the meantime, we have a whole bunch of one-time money. And so similar to what we did with NTC, where we said, hey, how do we unclog the system, right? We have so many CIP projects. Could this contractor approach work, get us through the clog and get through the backlog of projects we have until we get to the other side when we have a lot more operating dollars to work with once West Falls and Broad and Washington come online. So I know I'm offering 2 points of views, but I do like the creative thinking that we are going to some contractors. A few specific CIP questions. I'm going to start with transportation because those are the ones that continue to be the top concerns and requests I hear from the community. On the sidewalk projects, and I don't even know there's a slide on it, but it noted that back in January 2023, staff had presented kind of a list of sidewalk recommendations to council. I think at the time I had asked for a more comprehensive list because that was one of probably 4 lists we've all seen. The CACT's provided 2 lists to us. We've heard from other times. And so that's still an outstanding request. I think before we start committing actual projects of sidewalk investments, I just want to make sure we're starting off one comprehensive master list, and then we can decide which projects, bubble to the top. Second, on the rapid response team, what can we do to help? Because we funded it, and this is something that we were really excited about because we thought that the community wanted a more responsive approach to transportation needs. What can we do to help?
Well, thank you for that question. And thanks for all the comments that you've made. I think they're all very aligned with our thinking about how we can keep our commitments. When we put things in the projects, we want to deliver them. And so that is a big part of trying to organize the CIP so we will deliver what we say we're going to deliver in it. So we have currently 10 vacancies in DPW operations. It's about 30% of our operations workforce. And so that's been our challenge. That's been the challenge really throughout the pandemic. And we've been working very hard to get fully staffed in operations. Of those 10 positions, 2 of those are in the rapid transportation team. We have hired the team leader, but the 2 other members of the team are part of that group of 10 vacancies. And so that includes sanitary sewer, that includes street crews, kind of the basic maintenance work that we do citywide. So we will come back to you. We've done 2 compensation studies and made 2 efforts to address compensation. That marketplace has been so dynamic that our competitors have have also taken steps, and so we are struggling there. But there are also, I think, other tactical things that we could talk with the council. We know that all of our crew leaders want to be fully staffed, and so I think we're all aligned in trying to get there. We've just been struggling.
Yeah. While you're on vacancy rate, I think our overall vacancy rate had dropped back down to 10% or so, but it sounds like it's still a really acute problem in DPW ops. Is that right?
It's one of our most acute places.
Okay. And I think we talked about this in GovOps, but I know we've wanted to hit midpoint based on the compensation study with benchmarking with our the region, but if this is a really competitive skill or job family, is there an opportunity for us to consider paying above midpoint so that we can actually attract that kind of talent?
Appreciate the comment, and that's what we're looking at right now. And there's kind of one feature to it as well, which is CDL, qualified employees That is a nationwide need, a regional need, and we're kind of right there along with everybody else fighting for those qualified.
Moving on to other kind of transportation ones. I noted that in the work plan update that 20 miles per hour speed cameras were kind of coming this winter, as we talked about, but then a third photo red intersection was also coming this winter. Do we have an update on where the police are recommending that might be?
So it's the same contractor that will be doing the speed cameras as does the photo red as well. And so let me get a consolidated update to council on our rollout for those.
Okay. And then the last one was around the website updates. I think it said that there was going to be a RFP soon. Do we have a target date on when we might roll out a new website?
If I could get back with the council on that date, it's a good question.
Okay. In general, again, lots of really great work underway. It'd be great to do some sort of maybe in the focus, because a lot of these projects have a lot of community attention. Like, for example, the South Maple Annandale roundabout, which I think is I think we got a lot of people who are interested in that. So it'd be great to kind of highlight a couple of the projects, like the Hawk Signals. We just got a public comment about it over the weekend. It'd be great to highlight these projects so that people know when work is happening and to know that their taxpayer dollars are hard at work. So thank you. Really good work again.
Mr. Snyder?
So what is the plan for dealing with the public works vacancies?
So we've been going to job fairs. We've been doing all of the things to be visible to, where people are looking for that work. We have made hires. We've had some that, those employees just didn't work out. We've had to keep going with the recruitment effort. And so GovOps had a kind of a workout on our efforts in this area. We can kind of share what that discussion was. So I don't know what more else to say about it. We do have a third compensation study that we're asking HR to look at. We've done 2 in the last 24 months where we've made changes to try to address the compensation side of it. And we'll look at that a third time.
Can we talk about the possibility of hiring people who didn't have their CDL and putting them through training?
That is an option, and we do that as well.
All right, other comments about the work plan? Oh.
Unless I missed it, where does the Betos blockade fall in this?
So we have made an offer for the right-of-way acquisition. We've received a counter offer, and we have responded to that counter offer. So I'm hopeful that we'll bring that to a close soon. And once we have right-of-way, then we move forward with.
All right.
Also, the Gresham Place signal, is that's not tied into this North Washington Columbia, that's further down the way. Is that operating on any track that?
Yeah, that is being addressed with our Smart City grant application in partnership with VTTI, and it's under design now, and Public Works and VTTI have had a meeting with Arlington also, so it's progressing, but it's still not designed yet, but we got a funding plan for it. And then that long-term will tie into the North Washington Street CIP.
So I've got one question. The Oak Street Bridge on here is saying that it's going to be finished in December 24.
Oh, should be 23.
It's 23, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Got it. Yes. I was like, well, did it? Okay.
All right, well, thank you for these updates. I propose we take a 5-minute break or thereabouts, and we'll get back to our last bits of business after about 5 minutes or so.
Got the snack mix. Oh, there's a snack mix. The prize is actually too much. Oh, finance. Yes. Oh, I When we talk about that much,
Yeah, I'm thinking like when we start prepping for budget, like November.
It'd be good for Dana to look at.
Yeah, so bring Dana, bring Tom.
Kind of like a baseline.
Right,
Because I don't even know.
They do have, and they may be able to work out some cash and loan units, right? So for that, and we can discuss that. So I can plan for this one, affordable housing in November.
Okay.
And then Depot in November, and then these two in January BA. And the equity update, I mean,
I think, how do we spend the support? You know what that might require, Karen?
there's some,
might be, maybe my thing about how do we track that? Is that a metric? Track it based on suppliers, or vendors, or third parties. Does it track it by outcomes?
Neighborhood that gets sidewalks, neighborhood that get speed humps.
Right. I think we kind of need to think about how you measure.
yeah, and we could do that both of these in prep for the 25 budget. Like even the tax abatement and deferral, we changed it in fiscal year 23. And I think that we can look at it again. We do have a very robust and comparable program to the region. Better than many other jurisdictions that we can do these. So that's what I was thinking. We could skip October, but we do November 2 items, and then January 2 items, and then these two for fiscal year 25. And they could be in the January.
Well, now that I start the runway,
Okay. Yeah. And in November, in November, I'll also review if we have any usual.
I'm eating brain food here.
Big time. Big time, yeah. All right, everybody, why don't we go ahead and get started, and then we can get out of here a little bit sooner. So, Miss Bobble, where are you? There you are. You're ready to talk budget amendments, aren't you?
No.
Oh, yes, you are. Come on. All right. Well, here we are. We're back in session, ready to go and to hear all about the budget possibilities here. So if we can, everyone be seated. Let's go ahead and turn it over to Ms. Bawa.
Good
That's you.
evening, Mayor Tartar, members of the council. We have for you the first budget amendment for fiscal year 2024 and follow up to the year end that we saw the surplus for fiscal year 2023 year end. Just a quick recap, we have a total balance of $4,149,000 left after allocating the school share of $920,500. Of that, in this budget amendment, the proposal is to appropriate $1,887,240 out of that, leaving a balance of $2.26 million. What are we going to spend that $1.887 million on? I just passed out a handout. And at a high level, there's a filling up of CIP project shortfalls, and that is close to a $500,000 for that. And then their environmental sustainability, $110,000 for that, including the government operations and the community energy action plan. Both of those equipment and facilities, about $400,000 for that. And then miscellaneous projects for the remaining amount. Bringing a total appropriation request of $1,887,000. There are 4 or 5 lines in red that we're not proposing for funding at this time. Some little more work needs to happen in there. One of the bigger ones being the community center HVAC project that at this time the estimate on that is 2.7. We are expecting a refined estimate on that towards the end of November. And then there are a couple of other projects that we had discussed at the last meeting on October 2nd. And the timing would work better if we requested funding for those in January. So those are not included as part of this budget amendment. And I will stop there, see if there are any questions.
All right. Are there any questions? Are there any comments? There are questions. Ms. Hiscott.
It's more just a comment, and I'm thinking about the email sent in by Suzanne Updike about leaf vacuums, and just, it was a really well outlined, you probably saw, I think she sent it to ESC, outlined commentary on what best practices are with your leaves, which are actually to leave them on your yard, have them compost, mow them into your compost the next year. And she questioned the need for multiple leaf vacuum trucks, and could we better spend that funding encouraging people to leave their leaves right where they are, which I thought was a really interesting comment. I know it doesn't help us with, the budget amendment necessarily tonight, but I think it was a really key discussion. And then I'm just also thinking about the DPW folks that we have having a hard time recruiting, and because I think it's the same street crew that would be doing the leaf collecting, that would be doing some of the other work that we're looking at, and maybe some of the other work is more interesting, more fulfilling than being behind a leaf vacuum truck. I don't know, these things are all kind of dovetailing in my mind at the moment. Not necessarily helpful when you have an amendment in front of you, but things that I think do tie in together, that if we had more people doing more interesting work, would be something they'd be more likely to want to stay and do in Falls Church. Then I know it's difficult and kind of dirty job to walk behind a vacuum truck. You can't change people's minds overnight, but maybe we could spend some of the money on showing people why they should change their minds. Food for thought.
All right. Other comments? Ms. Hardy.
Yeah, plus one on that. I think I'd respond to Dyke, and actually had a conversation with Wyatt a couple weeks ago about the same concern, because aside from obviously the impacts of raking your leaves to the curb and all the things that leaches out, it just seems really backwards to me that we're driving a diesel truck around to vacuum leaves and then asking more trucks to drive on the road to go pick up the leaf compost and bring it back to your house, right? So just in the vein of how do we reduce cars on the road and get people to drive less, we are not doing a very good job of modeling that example. So tactically, what would it take to actually decrease leaf collection, which I know is a very popular service, but how do we encourage, people to compost on site and slowly make that transition? Is that like a budget amendment item that we could fund with more education?
So one, I will say I'm very excited by this conversation. I have really enjoyed composting leaves at my house for many years, and think it's a great way to go. And I do think that our crews would appreciate if more people did it that way, because it is very hard work to get those leaves up. It is also very energy intensive. Lonnie Marchetti is working with the community on our solid waste management plan. I think that is one vehicle for us to talk about this as a policy issue. And I think it also ties in with the energy, community energy, or maybe the government energy plan specifically. Yeah. I will just share kind of my personal thinking is that is a major change. I do view it as kind of one of these core basic services that people do expect. And so I've been approaching it from the perspective of working with Mr. Herb Holmes, Mr. Zach Bradley, on trying to think through the equipment that the staff need to do that job successfully, to do it efficiently. Our current leaf vacuums are very old. They break frequently. We've had a model of, run things until they completely collapse. And so we want to have a model where where our staff have good equipment, where they can get the job done and not have equipment that breaks down on them. So that is what's embraced in this budget request, is to not buy new chassis. The council is already committed to buying the new truck chassis, but to have the switch and go equipment so that that new vacuums can be placed on those new trucks that we're purchasing. One just feature of it too, oftentimes leaf pickup is during snow season, and with this switch and go, you can very quickly take the leaf apparatus off, put the salt spread apparatus on and the plows on, and the crews don't spend a long time with that switch, which is currently the case. So that's just some additional input on this. Could we make a 5-year transition to less and less leaves on the street? I would love to set some goals for that and then see if through persuasion and public education we can make real progress on that. If the council wants to go in a more aggressive direction on that, I think that's a policy discussion we could take up with the solid waste management plan. And those are my thoughts on it.
Yeah, the current leaf machines, I think from the staff report, say that they're 25 to 30-year-old equipment. How long should the new vacuums last us? Or is it like a 10-year purchase, 15-year kind of?
I think the model where we want to move to is spend less on maintenance and have our capital actually, working for us. And so I would think, 7 to 10 years is as long as you would want this type of equipment to be in service.
So if we think that in 3 to 5 years, I'm going to be a little more aggressive than the 5-year plan to kind of move away from as much leaf pickup, I would hate for us to be spending capital for a 10 or 15-year purchase when we think we might be able to get the community to adopt on-site leaf composting and mulching. So would it make sense for us to only fund one leaf vacuum, knowing that we might be making a policy switch at some point instead of 2?
Well, if we do that, we'll still be stuck then with kind of
You'll have one that'll be really operational and one that's broken half the time.
equipment that, because we're also trying to move away from those old trucks that the old equipment fit on.
Yeah.
And so, I would stand with a recommendation, let's move to modern equipment, give staff the equipment they need to get the job done. I would note, this equipment does have some resale value, obviously, at a great discount relative to what we'll pay for it new. But if we were to transition away, then we would be able to liquidate equipment.
Okay. Yeah, I think generally the concern with all the fleet changes is we would like to move to greener options. I know there's not great ones out there for a lot of the heavy duty stuff, but I'd hate to make these, 10, 15-year purchases knowing that we really want to get there sooner, and then we're stuck with the capital. So I would continue to have concerns about spending $250,000 for the leaf vacuum. The other item I was going to raise is the ADA plan update that I think some of us raised last week. That just seems really expensive just to do the plan and not actually do any actual ADA remediation. And so I know that that's in partnership with City of Fairfax, I think I remember reading, but if there's any way to bring that down, it just seems like a lot of money to just even do a plan. That's it for me. Thank you.
On the leaves, is there a fee-based option? If we have the truck and, we don't want to run it around town as much as it runs around town now, could we, like people leave bags at the curb and put a sticker on them, if people are really wedded to having their leaves sucked up, could they have that option as a pay-as-you-go thing and then use that money for other worthy purposes?
I think those are good policy options, but I think they probably need, they need to be worked through. And I have shared Ms. Updike's emails with Lonnie Marchetti, and I have to confess, I don't know to what detail the solid waste management plan is taking on leaf pickup. I know it is an important part of our overall solid waste plan, but I just don't know. I haven't read kind of what their thinking is on this policy issue, and I don't know if Mr. Young has any insights on that at this point.
No, I think we'll take that back as a follow-up.
Yeah, I don't expect it to be decided tonight or next week or this year, but it's just an idea. If we're going to buy the truck anyway, which sounds like we are, let's try to maybe change the policy and might find that people are willing to pay for it and it pays for itself, and then we can use those resources elsewhere. Or maybe we don't find that out. We find out that we're just stubbornly wedded to leaf pickup as one of those Falls Church Way things that you just dare not change at the risk of political beheading.
Mr. Snyder.
Yeah, I think that this is an issue with a lot of community conversation. Start eliminating a service that I think a lot of people feel that they're paying their tax money for. So I think there have to be realistic options for properties where there are a whole lot of trees. I can't composting. that is always a successful approach. So anyway, a whole lot more discussion before we go too far in this direction.
All right, other comments, either about leaves or about anything else in this budget?
Has the mayor fortified himself with snack? My turn to speak now.
Didn't you just speak?
But not as you well know, the topic nearest and dearest to my heart.
All right, Phil.
Caroline wants to go first, I think.
Yeah, my question is on line 186, the ARPA funded initiative carryover. So we didn't spend 1.37 million of ARPA money in 23. The largest line item on that is for affordable housing of 856,161. Where's that?
That's the money for Virginia Village for the rehab and acquisition. It's just a timing process, but it's still a required need in the plan.
What was the plan to spend it on in 23?
Either acquisition of another project or the rehab at 310 South Maple. And as you know, the cost and the construction piece has escalated. So we've been working that through with Wesley along with the Virginia Housing Financing.
Okay. So how much of that did we not spend? Is it all of it?
The original appropriation was 1.9 and this is the remainder. So we spent half.
Okay.
Half of it bought 310 and the other half is to rehab.
All right, I gotcha. And we didn't spend the 175 on capital area food bank grant for all the food insecurity issues. We rolled that over into 24.
I think that's a timing for their facility piece, the partnership one. That's correct.
That's correct, Cindy. I was going to say that was what they needed for the food bank opening, and they're just now.
Okay, so this is really just the timing of it didn't really allow us to spend the money. It's not, I just want to make sure, particularly for the grants for like life, health, safety, like food banks, that we're doing our best to spend that. So it was just a timing issue.
That's correct.
Okay.
On all of them on this list, I believe.
So it was just available in the late half of 23, which is why we just couldn't spend it fast. Okay. Okay, thank you.
Ms. Conley and Mr. Duncan.
Okay, so I'm just going to ask about the little things at the bottom of the chart, Ms. Bawa. And there are a lot of little things on here that we have talked about, and I'm glad to see there's a Vietnamese community outreach on here. I think that's really important. That definitely came up in the last year. What does TOT for Business District Improvement mean? $16,000.
That's the part of the hotel tax that goes towards the business district improvement. So they did, again, this is a carry forward.
We haven't spent it.
We haven't spent all of it. A portion of it was left and they want to carry it.
And then the public art wrap, same thing. That's a carry forward. It's not a new $20,000?
This one is a new. So the carry forward is in the ARPA, the 24,000, and then we're adding 20 to it. So they're going to be able to do 8 wraps total.
Awesome. Okay. And the parking study? CPED's parking study? Is that a carry forward or is that new?
No, that is a new. That is requesting for the first time, requesting for the parking study, 60,000.
And or 50,000? Have we discussed that parking study and I've forgotten what it is? Is that just completely?
It's on the work plan. I think we talked about updating whether our multifamily and commercial parking requirements need to be.
Oh, it's parking requirements, not the study of parking places. Okay. And the 75th anniversary celebrations?
So that for
this is an additional $72,000?
Correct. They already have an appropriation of 25 that's being carried forward, and so it brings it total cost of 97,000.
And the 25,000, half of that covered the logo marketing piece, and then the collateral and street banners, just a timing issue. The additional money is to do the initiatives that have been talked about for City Hall. Art chambers here, the welcome sign, the love, and so forth. So that's the additional cost estimates.
Okay. And then at the very top, we have in red, a bus for recreation and parks, $107,000. Is that something that could be an electric bus?
So for that reason, I think staff is going to do some discussion on what the options are. If this is just going to be for seniors, does it have to be a full-size bus or some other electric vehicle options that are, so we'll bring that out at the next budget amendment.
Thanks.
Thank you.
And if I can add one more change that we're going to add to the first reading would be moving 60,000 from the parklets project for the gift card program based on the motion that was done by the EDA earlier this week, or later last week, sorry.
Yeah, the quick summary is the EDA is proposing to restart the gift card program that was really successful last holidays, but because they haven't started with their parklets, they're going to take the parklet money, 60,000 of it, and put it towards the gift card program. So not new money, it's money they were already appropriated to them. Is that right, Karen?
Yes, that'll leave a balance of $695,000 for parklets project.
Then can I just ask one more question, which is how much then is being allocated new for the arts? We've got the utility boxes and the 75th anniversary art projects that will be happening in the city.
So what's your question, sorry?
Just how much new is being allocated for the arts? $20,000 more for utility boxes and the majority of the $72,000.
72,000 is all new. The carry forward on the 75th anniversary is 25,000 in addition to the 72.
Right. But Cindy just said that 72 is for City Hall art, library art. The majority of it is for art programs. 75th
The
anniversary.
anniversary money is all for art.
Yes.
And so that 72, because the other part went to things that weren't as clear as art, and then the traffic control box, those four
Right,
additional ones.
okay. So it's about $92,000.
Yep.
Going towards arts
And in
programs.
addition to 49 that was already allocated.
Got it, thank you.
Just following up on that, and speaking of letters that we've gotten from folks, former Vice Mayor Meserve sent us a communication, I think, about requesting supplemental appropriations for Creative Cauldron and maybe some of the other arts and culture organizations. I don't have any strong feelings on this, but I just wonder if what the other members of council think about that, and or if there's any overlap or coordination with other monies like 75th anniversary celebration monies that could spill into a venue like Creative Cauldron. I don't know, what's our response to that letter that we received?
For just a technical fact, I want to be clear that my understanding is the Creative Cauldron ask is for capital campaign to build out their new spot, so it would not be the same as the 75th anniversary funding.
Okay, so there's the answer to my question, there's no direct overlap. So she's asking for obviously, again, you don't have to decide it tonight, but it's a serious request. It's an important institution in the city, as are many other institutions, and it is a special time for them. So I would just suggest that you all communicate with staff if you have any thoughts about that.
I just want to reiterate that we spent a good amount of time tonight talking about our energy action plan, and we know that those are also expensive. We're just going to have to balance out needs of transportation, arts, education, environment. I think the environment has taken a back seat, as we can see, for many, many years. And so I just want to, in sharing my opinion, I want to make sure that we're focusing on something that will impact all of us, and I feel is a strong underlying value of our community, in addition to art, which I also really like. But we have been pretty consistent about spending on art. So I want to make sure we're balancing it with the investments that need to be made to improve greenhouse gases, and our commitment to the region for that too.
Okay, very well said. I mean, I'm sure there's competing viewpoints, but that's certainly well expressed. I don't know what I think about it, frankly, but it's just something that was sent to us that About something that is near and dear to my heart, I would like to turn the page and thank first Ms. Bawa for winning the Civil Servant Writing Award. We're on line 30. Yes, line 30. She says, during previous council meetings and work sessions, staff heard from council about using some of the FY 25 surplus towards programs to directly benefit residents, blah, blah, blah. I'm not sure that it suggests that I'm the leader of some great movement. I'm not quite sure that's the case, but I appreciate the sentiment anyway. Seriously, there is, I don't know quite what to call it. There's sort of some anxiety over the surplus that is undeniable. I hear it when I talk to my colleagues occasionally. It's a good thing, obviously, to have a surplus rather than a deficit. When I first started here 11 years ago, we were up against the wall doing battle with Fairfax Water and didn't have a rainy day fund of sufficient size. And I concluded back then that, we needed to grow our way out of our predicament. We needed to earn more money. And thanks to all that I've served with, we have done that. We've proven that growth pays for growth. And yet now it brings us to the point where we've been for at least the last several years that I can recall, where sometimes with only a week's separation, we pass a budget, cut ourselves up over 1 or 2 pennies on the tax rate, and end up with a surplus that amounts to 10 cents on the tax rate. And I don't quite know what to do about it. I mean, obviously everybody's doing their job. Nobody's trying to come in with a number that's high. Circumstances intervene, etc. It's going to be up to you all next spring to decide what to do about it. But here and now, I would like to see, as I mentioned earlier tonight, some immediate relief on the car tax. If that could somehow be connected to an environmental goal, I think that would be dandy. I was talking to Jody just earlier, and she's just thrilled about the idea of sending rebate checks to people. Not, just want to make sure. Just kidding. But that's another option that the mayor will remember we have done before in our time, and the world continued to turn. The other two, avenues of tax relief I'd like to see y'all direct your attention to would be towards folks who've been here a long time and probably are, if not house poor, at least, most of their assets are tied up in their house. And if some way we can expand our tax relief program for the elderly by defining the elderly as younger than we used to, or defining income or assets differently than we have before, in order to take some of the surplus money and help people who, have contributed to the community here for decades stay in the community for, another decade or so if they so wish. I'd love to see us do that. I mean, I think that would be a development dividend that serves social goods, a social good. And on the other end of the spectrum, I'd like to see us dedicate some resources to our program already existing to encourage homeownership, particularly from folks on the younger end of the spectrum, the starter end of the spectrum. Down in Richmond again, in Norfolk again, there was discussion with VHDA about a variety of tools. We know that we have some of our own through the Amazon Reach program. I understand that across the board, property tax relief may not have a majority of support, but I would hope that you all would consider directing some of the surplus to helping, home buyers, first-time home buyers younger than, pick a number, 35, meet their down payment obligations, because even if you've got a pretty hefty income, just the real estate costs here in the city are such that, putting together a $50,000 or $60,000 down payment is a burden. And I asked in the Raleigh George Mason program on Friday that I called into if there's anything that prevents us from doing that. They had a program on housing. And the answer was no. I mean, obviously we need to hear from our city attorney on that, but can we basically pick a class of people and encourage home ownership by helping subsidize down payments in particular? I would like those 3 ideas to be considered whenever it is that you all find most advantageous to consider them. Obviously, next spring, I hope that we would be in a good position with no other black swan events intervening to cut the tax rate again, because I think we're all going to see assessments continue to go up. But that will be for another day. The 3 ideas that I put on the table tonight are ones that I don't have a plan for exactly how to insert them into this budget amendment. I'm not even sure if we really need a budget amendment, because my understanding from our discussions last week was y'all are going to go ahead and spend the money anyway. You've got the money to spend. You've got the administrative flexibility to do so. So, except just by, signaling our approval of it, I'm not sure it's even necessary to do this budget amendment. So thanks for hearing me out. I appreciate it.
All right. Other comments? Anyone else? Ms. Conley?
Ms. Bowe, I just want to confirm we have a remaining balance of $2,262,000. No, yes. Well, we have a remaining balance of approximately $2 million. And we have a community center HVAC, which we think is approximately 2.7. Right. But that hasn't all come in officially yet. So that number is close to 2.7, not exactly 2.7, but that's the main area where we'll probably be spending this additional surplus. Right? Okay. And that is an important part of our energy action plan, as well as upgrading our CIP.
All right, other comments? Ms. Hardy?
So to follow up on Phil's proposed ideas, I guess, what is staff's take on which are the easiest to implement? Like, is it bolstering existing programs we have underway? Like, for example, we already have tax relief for seniors. Could we go deeper? Could we redefine definition of seniors or people with disabilities? Is that low level of effort? Another one could be, the one that I'm particularly interested in is our what's called CCAUs, which are the deeply affordable units that we funded. I think we funded 5 in the last budget. And this is 30 to 40% AMI, which is really, really hard to do regularly through our ADU program. And so I was really glad that we funded as council. Given that we were getting the process underway to do the 5, is it easier to add 2 more? Like, is that, I guess I'm looking for staff's take on what is the easiest to implement so that we can actually make a real difference with some of the surplus.
So just one thought for the city council. I would say anything that is programmatic, we probably would need, probably 2 months to sort of work through what that program would look like. Anything that is a rebate, then that we do have the treasurer and the commissioner of revenue who are here tonight who could talk about the feasibility of something that is in the nature of a rebate. So if the council were to provide some direction, which way would you want to go, or both, we could discuss those. A rebate is something, as we were thinking about this surplus, we were looking at personal property. And we did have internal discussions about, kind of what the administrative feasibility of a rebate on the car tax would be. It is more difficult than the real estate tax bill for a number of reasons, but one simply being the numbers. There are 5,000 parcels in the city, taxable parcels in the city, and over 10,000 cars. So it's just more complicated. There could be some discussion of just focusing on the decal fee, for instance. That's $33. If those were refunded, the cost of that is about $330,000. But that's $33 per vehicle in the city. And then if you want to tie that into an incentive to drive fewer miles or things like that, then you're really into a program, and we need to spend probably some months just to think through how we would administer such a program. Does that difference between sort of a programmatic approach versus just a rebate approach
Yeah,
make sense
so
to
my
people in
second layer
terms of the
question is
difference?
what are existing programs we have already that doesn't
Yes.
require you to set up new programs?
So down payment assistance, we have a program like that. We ran through that money very quickly. The council appropriated funds for that, I think, like 5 years ago. And so we had about a 1-year program with that. I'm going just off of memory, but the staff who are here, I think have Ms. Jones remembers that program. The CCAU is something they're working on right now, and so that is a program. If there's more money for it, it could be expanded. The difference between homeowner down payment assistance versus CCAU, you need to think about the long-term implications of that. Once the down payment money's gone, no one's vulnerable. Whereas if the CCAU money runs out and we have, let's say, 10 families that are benefiting from that, it becomes a very strong moral need to continue that.
Funded out of operating, the 5.
Yeah.
So this is
if
a risk
if
to
we
use.
were to expand CCAU, I would recommend that there be a minimum of probably a 4 to 5 year runway for that, so that you could plan ahead and not have people having to leave their homes.
Okay.
All right, other comments? Mr. Snyder?
Just to make one, which is the delicate balancing that has to be done here, because surpluses basically come from the taxpayers. And I think we have to be extremely careful we don't lose their confidence in their support.
So I'll just make a couple of little odds and end comments. One, on the ADA plan, I made this comment probably 3 weeks ago, 250 grand from something I suspect is a bit off the shelf from someplace else probably. Seems like a really big amount of money. I would love to see that just put towards taking out some telephone poles right dead in the middle of a sidewalk we already know about. So I do have concerns about spending that kind of dough for a plan. You mentioned the decal tax or the decal fee. I had this conversation, I don't know if you recall, a few years ago, where we're still charging a fee, right? Even though we're not giving a decal anymore. Isn't my recollection of this? So we charge $33 even though you don't get a decal anymore, which I remember, I don't know how many years ago we did this, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, that I swore I'd never support. Charging our people a fee for something they don't get, which looks like we've been doing and I probably forgot about. But I guess I would say I have a fundamental issue with charging for a fee that we don't, for a decal that we don't give to anyone anymore. So I don't feel horrible about that, but I think that's something that is just kind of not exactly right. So I share the sentiment, Mr. Duncan. We've had our days of we would work together on this rebate, the one rebate we've done, at least that I'm aware of in our city history, of giving money back when we had a surplus probably 10 years ago. Yeah, I'm sure you recall it as well. But I think in sentiment, that was a good way to do it. Psychologically, it was a good thing to do. So I don't know if that'll work at this point or not, but anyway. Anything else anybody wants to say about this? Do you need any action from us right now, any direction?
Whatever feedback we've got, incorporating that for the first reading on the 20th.
All right. So why don't we go ahead?
Yeah, so the plan is to bring an ordinance to you in a week. We could continue the rebate discussion without it being in the ordinance, but if there is a desire for there to be action on these things, I think we do need the input now.
Mr. Duncan?
I'm for it.
I'm just not clear what are you removing, or what funds are you looking at using for a rebate? Like, you wouldn't do X, Y,
I don't know. I don't.
What's the trade-off? Or I'm just wondering where the pool is.
I don't have a great answer to that. You know, what things you're going to nix.
You mean where are we going to get the money to do it? What did you say?
Well, I'm looking at this list that adds up to 2.2 when we had 4, and then you look at the things that we're not adding right now, which is a huge HVAC project and a handful of other things that are already over the 4 point whatever total it is. So we're already cutting the list that's in front of us. So in order to give a tax rebate, you're going to have to cut something else. And I'm just wondering what people are thinking should be cut in order to provide that. I understand the argument for it. I'm just looking to the logistics of, you have to decide what you're not going to fund if you're going to fund something else. And staff's looking for direction on that. Is that my impression? Right? Well, I've heard the ADA plan.
Is that the case? I mean, do you all, what would have to be cut out if you did allocate the
33,
what'd you say, $350,000?
$330,000.
I mean, my impression of the things that some of the things you just referred to is that some of them are pretty fungible and some of them we don't need to do right yet. And, 6 days from Sunday by next spring, we'll have enough money to cover that $350,000 plus more. That's my assumption. My assumption is growth will continue and resources will continue, and we'll get the $8 million for the grad center lot. And when you all
That's not this surplus.
Yeah,
right?
but
that's
it's
for tax for next year.
But again, it's money that we are pretty confident is coming in. My experience over the last 10 years has been where I was extremely conservative, and I understand why. We're a small jurisdiction. We had some hard times in 2008, and yet we're not as small as we used to be, and we have committed ourselves to a growth trajectory which has, set us up pretty comfortably. And it's only going to get more comfortable in my judgment. If I'm wrong, then you'll all be here next spring, and you can tell me I was wrong. But my personal feeling is that it's time to address the surplus anxiety, maybe a little strong, surplus tension, and tell the taxpayers that we're still going to be able to deliver goods and services at the level that is satisfactory, and we're going to give you a little tiny slice of the pie. Now, I would honestly prefer something that was tied to a more, social engineering goal, as we've discussed earlier, like an environmental goal or a home ownership goal or whatever. If that's too much to take on, a simpler way to do it would be some version of what we did 11 years ago, which was just a simple rebate.
All right, I don't know if we're going to solve this right now, but I guess we'll keep trying.
I think we ought to compile ideas and work on it some more. I think giving rebates is a very inefficient way to deliver response. I think a much better way is to commit, and this is where I agree with Phil, it's very odd to be within a week of each other, to be dealing with the last year's the surplus and then the budget, and the two are broken. I think we need more continuity, and I think a much better way would be to commit, for example, to do the HVAC, if that's the way we decide to go, but we commit that that's not $2 million or so that we're going to be funding in next year's budget. And then we ought to think about how to use that money, including some of the requests and ideas that have been made, but also how to reduce tax rates. So I think there's a different approach here that rebates make great politics, but they're very inefficient and they're very expensive to deliver, and I would rather deliver the money than spend the money on the process for a rebate, if in fact that's what we're going to commit to do.
Why don't you've heard a lot of the ideas. I don't think we're going to resolve them now. Why don't you give some thought to what you've heard tonight? See if there's some ways to skinny up some of these things. Maybe it can free up some money. The ADA plan, this $2.7 million. I know we're going to get clarity on that immediately, but my guess, it sounds like there might be some flexibility in that number ultimately when it finally comes out. Why don't you just spend the next week thinking about this, and then once you have some ideas, if it's midweek this week, later this week, you can update us. But I don't think we're going to reach a consensus tonight. That's my sense. It's also getting late. And so that would be my suggestion for maybe what to do with this. Why don't we move on then to these consent items briefly?
So I was not planning to kind of walk through all of them. Let me just open the floor if there are any questions about any of these consent items. All the staff write-ups were in your packet, and the purpose of that is just to give you a chance to read through them. If you do have any questions, we will address them in the staff report in your meeting next week.
All right, any questions about consent items? Ms. Sardi.
For the property yard planning, help me understand, was it we committed money to it and we need more money? Is that the gist?
So the council committed money to it. We haven't spent all the money that the council committed. However, we have crossed the threshold by which we need a council approval of the contract. So now we need a contract approval.
Okay. The two items that I was concerned about, which I think is, hopefully this plan addresses, is the impound lot that was raised at the last CIP that I had concerns about, because why would we commit really valuable land to hold cars that we impound maybe like 2 a week or something? So that was one. And then the second is with Fairfax Water vacating their building, the opportunity to do something with a homeless shelter or something different altogether. Is the plan going to address both of those needs and more creative solutions on how to use that land?
So that is the scope of work, is one, to deal, figure out how are we going to deal with impounded vehicles. It is a need, but what's the most land efficient way to do that? And then two, to think out the future options for a shelter on the site. Now that's the future. The emails the council has been getting are more immediate, like could we, the moment Fairfax Water moves out, could we expand the homeless shelter? And we're in communication with the Friends of the Shelter. We do not believe that that is feasible in the immediate term. So that's kind of the short answer on a complex topic. But this is intended to do more feasibility study on the best location for a homeless shelter on this property somewhere in the future.
Okay. So maybe tell me whether the architect can do this, but I think the opportunities for this land seems akin to the 10-acre parcel and what I do, which is not just how can we fit a bunch of stuff on here, but what is the economic impact of unlocking this land for other uses? And is there a more efficient way to put all the needs on there, but then do other things with it? Because this is really valuable land across from 40 acres of development just across the street. And so I don't want us to just be constrained to thinking about, well, how do we fit all these DPW trucks on there? How do we fit, the pile of leaf mulch that we may or may not have in 5 years? How do we fit, all these current uses? Is that in scope for what this architect can do? Kind of the economic impact and the opportunity cost of the current uses?
So those are going to be next steps. So going back to the school study, I would submit that we were kind of frozen on thinking about the school until we really went into the detail. What do the schools need on this property? And the schools answered that question with its feasibility study. So similarly, these operation needs are really important, vital needs for the city. So we have started, similar to the way we did with the school site, is let's first zero in on what are the public service needs that we have to meet, and let's try to rationalize and optimize that, and then think through what are the future other uses that could happen on the site.
As long as we're just not anchored to the current way of doing things, because it just seems like a really inefficient use of land when you go back there. So that would be what I would propose for the scope of that if we're going to spend another $80,000 on this.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Ms. Connolly?
I'd just second that. I think that's a good thought, buddy.
Let me ask you about the use of that property. The concrete plant, how far is that concrete plant from that property?
It's immediately adjacent.
I mean, it's like 100 feet or 150 feet, something like that?
Like the
facilities itself.
How far is the building from the property?
Yeah, like all the activity. I mean, it's pretty much right there, isn't it?
Yeah, it's right there.
I mean, it seems to me like that'll dramatically limit what you can do. You're not going to put the 10-acre development next to a functioning concrete plant.
Yeah, we agree, and we also recognize that the uses we have to have for that property, sometimes it's not great being neighbors to it, because sometimes we're working all night long. The backup beeps, they're going. And so those are just the realities of what we need to do on the site. And so our neighbor and potential public-private partner, we are probably thinking more along the lines of, data center, storage, those types of uses as being one. One could be a good neighbor for us because we could actually use some of that storage space as well, more than sort of residential uses and things like that. Now, our other neighbors, they might have those types of uses in mind, and that's just something we'll have to navigate. But those are a couple of initial thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a different paradigm back there. I mean, having been back there and walked around there on every side, concrete plants are just not what the vast majority of redevelopment wants as an immediate neighbor. So I think we need to set our expectations of what we're going to get there as long as there's a concrete plant there. So anyway, all right, anything else on consent items? If not, let's move on to
Just one question about the juvenile money. Whatever happened to the facilities question, and is this in any way related to that? We took a tour of the juvenile facility, and there were some discussions about its use, and so whatever happened to that? Do I know?
So it has been quiet through the pandemic. We basically just decided that, but it is coming back up as an agenda item. I've received an email from the county manager of Arlington asking that we revisit the question. There's also a member of the state senate that has very strong opinions on how these facilities should be operated, I think specifically consolidated. So maybe there's more to discuss, and it is getting back on people's agenda.
all right, any scheduling comments people have? Mr. Snyder?
Legislative committee tomorrow, unless we can't get attendance.
Yeah, it looks like we may not have attendance, so I'll work with the committee chair to see the steps.
Okay, well then we'll reschedule.
All right, other scheduling or other,
Cancel the Budget and Finance Committee on Friday after consulting with Ms. Bawa, since we just had this robust discussion tonight. Not much to talk about on Friday, so we'll put that off till November. Put that off till November.
all right.
Just had a comment, or I've had several residents share with me their displeasure at the new parking payment system and paying for parking at Founders Row 1. I guess it was just implemented last week. And so shared that with Becky, and Becky shared that with Founders Row 1, because their comments, throughout the process where they weren't intending to make money off of the parking. But, now they're charging for parking and through a complicated way. And I'm concerned about that when there are still so many tens of thousands of square feet that are not leased. So I just wanted to say that hopefully we can continue to work with them, either on a better process or, holding off on some of that. I don't know what we have control over, we don't, but just another thing to think about as we're adding parking. Because to my knowledge, it's the only place we have to pay to park in Falls Church. No.
Okay, so I haven't driven up there, obviously, because I walk, but, so you get a ticket, and if you patronize one of the businesses, then you validate that ticket and you park free?
For 2 hours.
For 2 hours. Well,
Which means every time you do a Pilates class or you do something like that, you're going through.
You got to go through the ticket thing,
So,
welcome.
just to be aware of that.
Welcome to Big Cityville, this is, we don't want people to drive cars, and yet when they drive cars, we want to give them free parking. And I don't know, at some point we have to ask ourselves what we are. Every time I go to the hospital at Fairfax, and I got to get a ticket, I got to get it validated, I get free parking. It's the way life is, and in metropolitan land.
So what'd you have, Phil, scheduling was?
Mine wasn't a schedule item, but I did get, I understand what you're saying. A little annoying that, I don't think we ever discussed it, but like many things that we do for the first time, it's, okay, anyway. It's a good sign that we have people who are charging for parking if they can get any money for it at all. I can't imagine they're going to get much out of it, but a citizen called me this afternoon and was walking on the bike trail on the east end of town, maybe even over into Arlington, and reported some graffiti related to the Middle Eastern situation. And that's regrettable. And I don't know whose job it is to clean it up, but, Park Authority or Nova Parks or Arlington or some of it close enough that it's us, but I would just ask the staff to look into it.
Why don't you give them the location if you know it, Phil?
It's right there at the bike bridge, and I don't know, I got some pictures that she sent me.
Sycamore? Or the one you go under?
East side, the North Washington.
When you go over.
Yeah, right. It looked to me like the noise wall was right around that area. I don't know. She was.
It's pretty
she was
close to
talking me
Arlington.
as she was walking, so it
We'll tell
sounded
them it's Arlington.
like it was more than one incident. It was, like somebody had gone through there.
In that same area, there's actually a really big homeless encampment that I flagged to staff about it, but I think it actually might be in Arlington.
It's in Arlington, that's on the other side. The guy's got a grill, he's got the full, it's a big guy. Yeah.
Holy cow.
All right, anything else? Let's adjourn. Good evening. No, not tonight. So the closed session, one of the people who are going to participate is ill, and so we're going to put it off till next week. So if you can,
Bear with us.
Yeah, hold off for a week. All secrets will be revealed. All right. Anyway, we are adjourned.
Thank
Good
you,
evening.
council.